I'm Nick Von Walkerbarth, and you're listening to the Von Dubcast. If you don't want to listen to me gap in the intro and you want to skip right to the interview, skip about 10 minutes. But before you do, please consider doing one of these couple things that really helps out the show. Following the social medias for the Von Dubcast, subscribing, and leaving a review. If you could do those things, that'd be awesome. Also, give me a subscription on the YouTube channel. That'd be great too. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Von Dubcast. Got a really fun guest for you guys. It's welcoming back Lars Callieou. He was on in probably the first 30, 40 episodes. He was my first swing at getting a comedian on the podcast. I was really, I'd reached out to a few, but it was kind of tough to find the right guy for the job when you're first starting a podcast and you don't have much to go on. I think it's a much different situation now because I've kind of have a couple pieces, and this is all thanks to Lars. This is what kind of kicked it off. That's kind of the point I'm trying to make. But when I first started, I have all these passions for things like MMA or comedy in this instance, and you have nothing to prove that you know what you're talking about, or that you can hold a conversation that's going to be meaningful to someone within that expertise that they would enjoy as well. And for that reason, you don't want to reach out to too big of comedians, but then, I don't really know anybody, that's more my pace for the podcast. And when somebody put me in touch with Lars, they'd spoke before I met him. I mean, and you could probably hear this in the intro I did for the first episode we did together, but, when somebody put me in touch with Lars, they kind of spoke to what type of person he was, and just the way they were describing was like, oh, this is exactly who I need, just somebody that is, not only talented when it comes to stand-up comedy, been doing it for a while, skilled, but also very kind and very much about helping people, and very much in the same vein of things as I'm doing with this podcast, of really, doing it for a lot of selfish reasons, but with a lot of goals in mind to help other people and to elevate other voices. And I think that really fits with who Lars was. So I think that made me a little less nervous the first time we sat down. And ever since, that first conversation we had was amazing. And it really, not only was it a great conversation, I think a lot of people enjoyed it, but like I said, it that was my first piece of art or work, whatever you want to call these podcasts, that I can look to and show people, hey, this is when it comes to comedy, I might not know everything, but I know more than the average bear, and I love to talk about it. And I hope that maybe that's what got me in the door to get guys like Todd Ness on and any future comedians. So that was great. And like I said, just how he's built up to me was exactly who he ended up being. There's no sense of Hollywood or all that kind of baloney about Lars. Excuse me. And he's just a really good person. And I really enjoy talking to him. Lots of laughs. He has some great stories, and we've done 2 episodes now. I don't know how many hours total, and there's still probably 15 different things on my list that we haven't got to talk about. The Okanagan Valley is a hugely important place to me. He started the Okanagan Comedy Festival. We haven't even talked about that yet. And so many other things, him going and doing comedy overseas. Having said that, we got to a lot of topics, and I really enjoyed it. I enjoy how open Lars is about his journey with comedy, and the ups and downs of it, and just how intimately his personal journey, how he articulates it, and how aware he is of, what parts he wants to work on and who he wants to be and what he wants his comedy to be and to turn into, and to be able to, because that was something we discussed in the first one. It was interesting to ask him again of, hey, we talked about that was what was really important to you, and how is that process going, and to hear him, taking steps forward, not just on the comedy journey, because once he's stepped onto it, I don't think he's ever stepped off. He's always taking step forwards, but real meaningful steps towards kind of what we talked about, of making his comedy come from his gut. And that was a fantastically amazing topic for me to be able to talk about, because it might not sound like it to you guys, but that is a very personal thing to a comedian, to be able to talk like that openly. Like, that is very vulnerable stuff. And I hope that comes across of what Lars is putting out to the world when he talks about those things. And it makes me so thankful, because, there's no way I'll ever understand it unless I started doing comedy and maybe did it for another 16 years. But, in the amount that I can understand of just how much that means, I'm very thankful for it. And I'm thankful to Lars. So I hope you guys enjoy that comedy, that conversation we had. As you'll hear us talk about, it's Christmas party season. There's always times to hire a comedian. It doesn't have to be a Christmas party. Sorry, guys. There we go. No COVID, I promise. I've been taking rapid tests like a mother. yeah, what was I saying about, Christmas parties, Christmas parties. There's never a bad time to hire a comedian, whether you're doing a spring breakup party after a hard winter season in the oil field, you want to do something. If it's a Christmas party, like you said, for my money, nothing beats a comedian, right? And like, I think Lars did a huge service in describing what goes into that, because I think people think comedians are just like, the local band, you shove them in a corner, they don't need much, as long as there's a plug-in, they're good to go. Comedy takes a little bit more than that, and it takes a little bit of structure, but if you do treat it seriously and like Lars says, ask the talent what they need to be successful, it's going to be awesome. And I think that season's coming up. Like Lars said, if you contact him on social media, he can put you in touch with somebody, right? Like if you're thinking, well, maybe I can't afford a 16-year comic that's going to, rightfully demand the money that his skill set possesses, contact Lars. He'll put you in contact with somebody that is going to fit the bill for what you need. So yeah, other than that, just check Lars out on all his social medias. Please give him a follow. If you like any of his stand-up clips, anything, you go see him, please tell him that you heard about him here. That's what really helps the podcast. And yeah. Right. All right. And just to give you guys a little bit of heads up, I won't get too far into it because I don't want to make this intro too long, but just what I've been up to. Had a great week last week. The last time you guys would have heard from me would have been Monday. So Monday drove up to Edmonton, went to the hockey game, saw another Oilers W. That was amazing. Tuesday had an amazing podcast with Lars here, as you guys will hear. Then Wednesday had another really, really spectacular conversation with another local Slave Lake resident. She doesn't live there now, Ashley Severson, about her what she's been through the last couple of years. She has been battling breast cancer, and the story that she told me on Wednesday, holy man, guys, I cannot wait for you guys to hear this. It's so important. And just how willing to talk about every aspect really blew me away. And it really changed my mindset on so many things. And I'm really excited for you guys to hear that conversation. So I had that. Then went to another Oiler game Wednesday night, had dinner with some business contacts with my dad. That was a lot of fun. It was fun to talk business. I think kind of stepping out of that world, I was so disenfranchised with it and was, not really enjoying it that much, but just to be able to hop back in it a little bit and see that fire is kind of relit of now that I'm not being forced to be in business mind 24/7 and all that. It really kind of has reminded me how much I do really love business at its core, when it's not being forced upon me. And that was fun. So, and then watched another Oilers W. Again, sorry guys here. My throat has been absolutely mangled. I've just, I don't know what it is or what it's been, but the last 2 weeks, my voice has been barely there and is coming back. Maybe it's going to Oilers games. Who knows? That could have something to do with it, but just trying to battle back. Sorry for all the coughing. And if I sound like I smoked 6 packs of cigarettes this morning, apologies. So went to another game Wednesday, stayed Thursday, picked up the dog on Friday because me and my ex-girlfriend Alyssa, we've been just kind of splitting the dog, and that's been tough. That's probably one of the toughest things has been dealing with, is that whole situation, but got the dog back now. We just had an amazing little cuddle here. Drove back to GP Friday, watched that best hockey game I've seen in years, that Oilers-Rangers game. How spectacular was that? That was amazing. Woke up Saturday, had an amazing day of fights. That fight card, UFC 268, I can't even explain to you guys how amazing it was. Man, what is with my voice here? I'm just struggle-uggling. Oh well. Hopefully by the next intro you hear, I'll just be crisp and ready to go. I doubt it, because it seems like my voice is not getting better. Even with the little rest I try to give to it, it's not seeming to get much better. But like I said, amazing UFC card, top to bottom, was stacked and it delivered. And just been really loving. And then this morning on Sunday, went to the open mat jiu-jitsu and got an hour of rolling in, and it was just so much fun. I'm really loving that jiu-jitsu journey. That's a journey. Jiu-jitsu is a journey. Cancer is not, as you guys will hear on the next episode. Yeah, that's kind of a little inside joke with me and Ashley. You'll get that one once you guys hear it. But yeah, so my life's been really awesome, really enjoying it, and just want to, I guess, say a huge thankful to you listeners. You're the ones that are making this all possible. If you could do me the favor of passing an episode on to a friend if you think they'll enjoy it, following any of the social medias for the Von Dubcast, Instagram, Twitter, all that. That really helps. Resharing any of the posts, that helps. And just subscribing, liking it, all those things. Giving a review, that helps. And also, a listener asked me to remind people just that you can speed these episodes up. I know in the first couple episodes I wouldn't shut up about how important I think learning to take in audible information at higher speeds is, and how effective it can be as a tool in your life. I still think that. I just kind of took a step back on trying to ram it down people's throats. But just a reminder, I know these episodes are long, but you can speed them up in whatever app you're listening to. There's always a playback speed option. If you start slow, maybe try on 1.25, 1.5, go from there. You can work it way up, and just makes the episodes go by a little bit faster. I love it. I live my shit on super speed, and everyone hates it. So just a reminder on that. And other than that, you guys have a great week, and I'll see you guys in the outro. All right, second time on the pod. How's it feel, Lars?
Good. I'm going for the record.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I want more people to go for the record. I think one of the, I don't know if it's the hardest part, but maybe one of the ones I saw coming the least is how hard it is to schedule and get people on a show. I always thought, like, it seems like when you listen to all these big, huge podcasts, people are just clamoring to come on. So you think, oh, once you start it, you build it, they will come. That's not quite how it works at the start. I'm finding out. So it's been fun though, but it's always such a gift when you got a guy like yourself that is knows how to talk on a mic, doesn't bring in that first bit of nerves that you kind of got to walk through. It's nice just to hop in with a real pro and just you can pretty much just throw the mics on, don't even need to say nothing. We can just let it rip.
Yeah, I've had a radio show on CJSR in Edmonton. It'll turn 16 years old in March of 2022. Mm-hmm. So it's 15 and a half years old.
Yeah.
Getting guests you're just scrambling all the time. And there's an award that the radio station gives out. It's like fly by the seat of your pants, I think it was called. So who puts on the best show just flying by the seat of their pants? I don't know how we haven't won that every single year. We've never won it, but we'll book guests. Like we've had guests like minutes before the show starts come into studio and do it. So I'm with you with trying to find guests, and mine's weekly, so it's a pain in the
So you've been doing that show once a week for 16 years.
Yeah, it'll be 16 years in March.
Wow. So how did that first start how did that come to be?
My dad had a radio show when I was a kid, when I was like 4 years old. And I've like vaguely, I have a vague recollection of it. And so I guess I thought it was cool. I think I had, been to the radio station a couple of times. So it was just a weekly on Saturdays, just played music. And then I saw Good Morning Vietnam when I was 13. And Good Morning Vietnam, I was like, I want to be a DJ. But I wanted to be a comedian, but being on radio was a cool idea. And I recorded probably the first 4 years of episodes.
Yeah.
And then there's a 4 or 5 year period in the middle where there's no record of it. They're just lost into the cosmos.
It's in the ether, hey?
Yeah. And I wanted it that way. I like the idea of this, you just put it off and it's finished. Like you don't have to worry about, so, and I mean, not that we would have said anything risque or,
right.
But yeah, I was like, I liked it. It was just gone.
For sure. And that's actually something I'm glad you brought the radio show up, because that's actually one of the things I wanted to ask you about, was that starting a radio show at the time that you did, and then to be constantly working on that skill, right? As well as you're working on your stand-up, it's a different skill, right? Some a little bit overlap, but different. And you're working this skill and you're gaining this new tool in your toolbox. And then about, I don't know, 2012 to like 2015 was kind of where it peaked, was all these podcasts are jumping onto the scene and really changing the whole comedy dynamic, right? I'd say maybe more down the States and maybe in certain markets, really in LA and really in New York, right? And kind of almost at two separate stages, right? It started in LA, kind of really took over that scene, and then slowly dribbled into the New York scene, and then that has really caught it. And right now they're on a huge trajectory. There's huge podcasts coming out of there. I'm curious how that was to you, of already having that skill, but already having like the principle of doing something a little bit differently, right? With a radio show. Was that ever something that pulled at you? Was that pulling you apart? Or was it you had enjoyed the radio style so much that you just wanted to keep it that way? Were you ever tempted to kind of podcastalize it?
I think there's okay. Self-promotion is by far the worst part of being a comedian for me.
Yeah.
The self-promotion part of it, like I have an album, if anybody wants a copy of I've recorded 2 other albums since, but I recorded my first album, I don't know, 2012, 2013, somewhere in there. And I had 400 of them printed. This was back when CDs, were still a thing. And I didn't need the money, but after a show, a lot of times people aren't buying it because they want to listen to the album. They're buying it as a souvenir of a good time. They're like, hey, let's just buy a souvenir.
You're buying a memory.
That's exactly what it is. You're like, oh, hey, remember that comedy show? Oh, yeah, that was a good show. I couldn't sell them.
Yeah.
And I just hated it so much standing there and hawking. I felt like I was at a garage sale. Like I hated it. So I just gave them all away. Yeah. I would just say to people, if you want a CD, ask me nicely, I'll give it to you. Yeah. And they'd come up, hey, could I please have a CD? Yeah, here you go. Just have it. So when it came to the podcast, I didn't think anybody gave a shit about the radio show, and I loved it, and I'm proud of it. It's a good show. Yeah, it's called Comic Genius with a J, which I think is the visual joke of like a visual joke on the radio is hilarious because you can't pronounce genius with a J. It's just genius. But so the idea of being like, yeah, we're Comic Genius. We just spelled it with a J. Like, anyway, and at the intro of it, it goes, we go, you spelled genius with a J. And I go, it is spelled with a J. Like the idea that there's this buffoon who thinks he's smart. So I like that character of like this buffoon. But the idea of self-promotion and like putting it out there so people would want to listen to it, I also hated that. It had the same feel of trying to sell those CDs. Yeah. So I hated the idea of trying to get people to tune into what I was doing because I don't think like there's just no ego or no self-importance, which is weird because you kind of have to have ego if you're doing a podcast or a radio show or doing stand-up. I love the exercise of the thing. I love stand-up. I love the writing of the joke. I love the telling of the joke. I like performing. I like all of that. I enjoy. And the radio show I just enjoyed. It was just it's having a chat with my friends. So I enjoyed that. But as far as like people would be like, why don't you podcast it? I'm like, if I found out that I had 7 listens altogether, like if I found out 7 people listened to, I'd be like, why am I even doing this? Like no one's listening. Right. There are people that tune in every week to the show, which is cool. And that, I was at a bar once and I was talking, and there was somebody directly behind me, and the person, we were facing away from one another, and I was talking to somebody else, and the person turned around and goes, are you Lars from Comic Genius? And I go, yeah. He's like, I listen to your show every week.
Recognize your voice.
Yeah, he recognized my voice. And it's funny when you, like there's a guy whose radio show I've listened to a lot, been on it a few times, Guy McPherson in Vancouver has a show called What's So Funny. And there's lots of famous people he's had on there. And I listened to so many. He podcasted all of his radio show. Yeah. So they give somebody like credit being like, this is the first comedy podcast. Guy McPherson predates that by a year. Yeah. So Guy McPherson of What's So Funny in Vancouver was really the first official comedy podcast. And he never toots his own horn, never tries to get credit for it. But I listened to him so often that when I met him in person, it was like meeting somebody that I really knew. Like you listen to the morning crew every, somebody's going through a divorce or a breakup or, they first started dating somebody. So you become familiar with that person and you're like, hey, they're your friend. It's a kind of one-way relationship. But the self-promotion,
it's the worst.
I hate it so much. And so I never podcasted. Norm started putting them up. The co-host started putting them up, but I just,
It's the worst. I'm really struggling with that right now with the podcast. I mean, I have since I started the podcast of that. So I enjoy it so much. Like the actual act, like exactly what you're talking about, the actual act, once you sit down, once the mic start, I enjoy this more than anything I've ever enjoyed. But to try and promote it, to try and even talk about it is a real struggle. And I think I was telling myself, I think I was lying to myself for sure, but I was telling myself, it's just because you're not doing it full time. It's not your full time gig, so it feels weird to promote it. That's what it is, right? But then, as of October 1st, I took a big step back from my job, and I'm actually doing this full time. And that self promotion is still just as icky. It's still just like it's still grates on you. And I think every time you just force yourself through that sickening feeling of doing it, it gets a little bit easier. But I mean, I got to admit, it's a little worrying if you're 16 years and you're still feeling that. I was kind of hoping, well, maybe that goes away after a year or two, but it sounds like it might be sticking around.
I think it's fun for me to see American comedians who can do shameless self-promotion. Yeah. Just no shame. Just here we go. And when they sell stuff after shows, they're like, come buy my shirts, come buy my stickers, come buy. And I'm like, oh my God. And I know that you're leaving a lot of money on the table. Because if you're a good comedian, people do just want that little souvenir. Yeah. But I'm like, I don't know if there's enough money in the world for me to want to do.
And maybe it's a Canadian thing of just that politeness of just wanting to. And I think for me too, it's definitely a lot of ego involved for myself, because I think I'm so proud of this podcast that it feels like to try and promote it or trying to get people to give it a chance feels like I'm insulting the thing I'm creating, right? Like I'm so proud of this. I shouldn't have to, which is a crazy, crazy ego trip just to even hear this come out of my own mouth. But like, you know, like to have to grovel or ask for people to give this thing a chance that you think is amazing, that they would benefit from. Like you'd be doing yourself a favor by listening to this, because I think there's something to learn, right? Like that's how I feel about this podcast. That's the passion I have for it. But to juxtapose those two things and to have to forget all that and just say, you know what? Like you say, nobody gives a shit about this. I've got to make them give a shit. I've got to sell this. It's just I'm sure I'll get over it. I have to get over it, right? If I want to achieve the goals that I want to achieve. But it's a very weird, it's another one of those things I just didn't see coming. I just thought like, man, of all the pitfalls that I had heard about, right? Because like we talked about, I've listened to so many podcasts and so many comedians, and I feel like, oh man, I've got this mapped out. I've seen all the pitfalls, I've seen everything. And then there's all these new ones that just never get talked about, right? Like that's one that I've never really would have heard about, right? And you'd think there'd be, maybe I just need to listen to more Canadian comics talk about it. Maybe I'm stuck in the American bubble, but that's very interesting to me, of just kind of how little I saw that coming and what I can do to get past that and then to move on, because I do think that's a big hindrance for myself. And I don't know if you see it the same way, but you.
Yeah, to definitely to my own detriment.
Yeah.
The idea of like, it's so funny. Like, hey, if you have a Facebook page as a Canadian comedian, you kind of get mocked.
Yeah.
You're made fun of. Like, look at his Facebook page. This loser. And we it's a crab bucket effect in that we do pull each other down a little bit. We, the great people, lift people up and send the elevator back down and all that. So I have a Facebook page that I've never put anything on. I just like got it.
Yeah.
And so it's like a Facebook fan page or whatever. And I wish I could go back and find the exact moment when I found this, because I think I know where it was from, but I don't know. So mouth clown, the idea of being a mouth clown. And you're like, what is your job? And you're like, I'm a mouth clown. I'm a professional mouth clown.
That's a good way to put it.
But I think there was a comedian named Bent Washburn, Bengt, Bent Washburn. I think he was the one that said it. And then but I don't know that for sure.
Yeah.
So I've had a conversation with him about it, because I just put on my like Twitter and social media stuff, I'm like, professional mouth clown. And people are like, what's a mouth clown? I'm a comedian.
Yeah. Come watch me, I'll show you.
So the idea of that promotion, just to be able to just lean into it. I don't know if I would ever be able to do it. And when you see, like, you hang out with Russell Peters, he's just really down to earth. He's so easygoing.
Yeah.
He's like easy to talk with. And most comedians are. Most of the most famous people I've ever worked with are just, they're chill. They're fun to hang around with. There's no pretense. There's no ego. And I think comedians kind of have to be that way in order to get through those first like 15 years or whatever it is. You have to just have some humility, because you take some lumps along the way. For sure.
And in the same way, I kind of equate this to fight. I see it both in fighting and comedy. There's certain realities of both those paths where if you want to be elite and you want to put everything towards them, right, there's certain things that you can't really do on your own, right? So you see this with fighters where they might fight at a weight division like 170 their whole career, and then when they finally make it in the UFC and they're finally making some money and then they drop a weight class in 155 because you need a nutritionist, you need a planner, you need all this stuff to get you down to that weight healthy and allow you to do that. But you can't do that when you're making no money fighting on a regional scene, right? And I think this is the same thing when I see this with podcasts, is like this self-promotion thing is so, for some, right? Like we said, there's been some that don't, but I think it's very common to have with whatever mixed bag you need to become a comedian. It seems like a thing that is often in that bag is that hatred of the self-promotion. But it seems like there's a certain point where if you don't concentrate on the self-promotion, just concentrate on becoming the best comedian you can, you're going to hit a point in your career where you can build around yourself a good manager, a good promoter, and they can kind of do that stuff for you, where now you're not being hindered like you were before in your career, but it's almost just part of the program. It's like you have a certain skill set you need to create, and then you can add on all those things. You can, and I think I'm also wishful thinking in my head of kind of thinking that same thing for this is like, what, just get as good as you can at being a podcaster and all that other stuff, the promotions, the clip channel, and learning to edit really good and doing all that stuff. That will come. You'll be able to create things, a system where that happens. But to me, that's an excuse, because what I really should be doing is just learning that all myself right now. I don't need to be looking ahead into the future of when people can help me with it. I should just be learning those things myself. But then it's that balancing act of, well, if I go into learning, video editing and all these things and promotion and marketing, am I going to be putting in everything I could to being the best podcaster I could, right? Or an equivalent to the best comedian I could, right?
Yeah. Mitch Hedberg has a joke about that where he's like, can you act? And it's like if you were the chef and they're like, well, can you do, it's like, probably, I'm not going to do the joke justice, but it's like, but I became good at comedy. Why do I have to learn how to act? Or,
exactly.
Why do I learn how to, but hopefully almost by default, those things come along. You learn some video editing, you learn, all of the different things that go part and parcel with this, the self-promotion,
right?
So that you can manage those things on your own. But if there is a team that does it for you, it's almost like a bonus. And it is a snowball effect where if you're great at what you do, if you're really good, people will find you. The cream will rise to the top. It really, there's a quote that I love, and it is, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Yes. It'll come if you just do quality work. Yeah. And there was a Sarah Silverman tweeted this out. It was one of the funniest lines ever. And it was, this guy went up to accept an award at the American Comedy Awards. So he goes up to accept an award and he said, I just want to thank my agent for believing in me when everybody else did.
That's funny.
So the idea of like, everybody's going to champion you once they believe you're good enough to be championed. They're going to get behind you once you're great. It's like, well, where were you guys when I was struggling? Like everybody's just along. But it is, I think one of the greatest lessons I've learned is, and I wish I could take young comics when I see them chomping at the bit and they want to do everything and they want to get this and they want to, and I always want to stop them and go, look, it's amazing to want those things. We all want them and you will get them, but enjoy the journey. As cliche as it sounds, doing that shit bar gig in Luceland, Saskatchewan is the best time of your life. Right. Driving to Grand Prairie 1,000 times is the best. All of those little things. I mean, I've loved the journey so much. I look back on 18 years in comedy and I think of all of these moments and all of these years and these wild successes and these horrible failures, all of those things. And every one of them was like, I look back and I'm like, that was really fun. Yeah. It's been a hell of a ride. And I mean, I hope it continues for the next 30 years, but to stop somebody and go like, look, I know you want to get on TV right now. I know you want to get Just for Laughs right now. I know you want these things, but enjoy what's going on around you now. Like we look back on, so the Druid Comedy Night ran for 9 years. So every Sunday for 9 years, I was hosting this comedy night and people are like, that was some of the best times of my life. And it was just doing this, open mic, downtown Edmonton, every Sunday at 9 o'clock. And the times when we would be up against an Oilers game and we would have to do comedy in between periods to try and get everybody through. Yeah. So I love, all of that has been great. And I almost wish I could be a little more shameless in the self-promotion. Hey, follow me on Instagram or Twitter at Extra Lars. That's EXTRA Lars. To do, like, it just feels like, ugh.
I know.
Like, and it feels like you have an agenda that people, I'm like, no, I just want to be a comedian. Like,
exactly.
I'd love it if you come out and see a show or, book a show. But it's, just as soon as people feel like you're trying to sell them something, right? You're like, oh, it's a used car salesman pitch.
And it's tough because inside that I am not trying to sell. Like, I know that how this comes across is I'm just trying to sell. I promise you, all I want to be is the best podcaster. And part of that is this, like, but it's so tough because so truly to yourself that is which one of those two things comes first. But when you put it out to the layman, it's always going to look like it's reverse, right? Like you're trying to sell yourself instead of that. But that's why it feels so shitty to say, even though deep down, right? And that's where I feel like I'm slowly getting better at it, is just because on every one of these intros before a podcast, I always, can you please follow me on social medias, right? And I say that every time, and I think I've stopped doing, but at the start I always used to say, it's not for me. I don't really care about the numbers. Like, that's totally, but what that does is when I get more numbers on social media, the bigger guests I reach out to, that's something they see and it helps the podcast grow. That's why I'm asking, right? And I'd give that little caveat, and it's, like, that's me being that's me being a coward a bit, because I know deep down that I'm true to myself and that my, everything's justified. I'm not doing this for the wrong reasons. I don't need to boilerplate all my statements with that, right? You just got to believe in that. And if you believe in it, it all doesn't matter. It'll all come back around in the end.
You got to qualify it. Feel like you have to preface this to go like, by the way, I just really love this thing. So can you guys join me on the ride? Yeah. It's a fun,
which I feel like is something that's easier to say with a podcast but I feel like that's the same moral of what you're trying to tell, people like after a show and everything too, but it's just, it's hard to explain that. And it sounds a little bit weird, like can you guys just really, I just want to be the best comedian I can be, right? Like it's a different dynamic, right? But like this, the feeling is still the same of like what you're trying to convey and what's really driving for the majority of the good comics or the good podcasters, what's driving them, as long as it's not, money or whatever those things. If it is a true passion for that art, that's all that matters at the end of the day. And that's what's going to carry you way further than anything else, right?
Yeah. It's a Pavlovian thing that you learn early on, in that in comedy, the funnier I got, the more I got to do the thing that I love.
Yeah.
So you learn this learned response of, if I write a really good joke, then I get hired or booked a little more.
Yeah.
Then if I get hired or booked a little more, then I get to do this thing that I love. So for me, it's very singular of focus. It's just a laser focus. I want to be on stage every single night. It's the only thing I want. And if I get really, really good at what I do, then people want me to be on their shows. They want me to do their podcast. They want me to, so that your celebrity increases. And I use that term very loosely. Your celebrity increases a smidge. Yeah. There's a tiny uptick if you're just a little funnier. And then the more tickets people buy to see you, the more venues want to book you. The more venues want to book you, the more you get to do the thing.
Right.
So it's very circular in that if I get really good at comedy, I get to do more comedy. My motivation for getting really good at comedy is so I can do more comedy.
Right.
There's nothing else I want in this world. I feel so often like I've gamed the system. I feel like I got a cheat code.
Yeah.
And people are like, when did you know you wanted to be a comedian? And I was like, who the fuck gets to be a comedian?
Yeah.
I don't know anybody who was ever a comedian. I didn't even see, I've watched it on TV, but I didn't know a comedian. So when people are like, when did you know you wanted to be a comedian? I'm like, I still don't, I want to do comedy more than anything in the world.
Yeah.
But the idea of somebody paying me to do comedy, and then that's just your job. There has never been a second when I woke up and went, yeah, I'm a comedian. That's just what I do. I'm like, I wake up in the morning and I'm like, well, I'm a fucking comedian. This is crazy.
Exactly. And it's funny when you're like, I don't want to put anyone else, but I'll just use myself for example, right? Like my first memories of comedy, because my parents both like stand up, right? They not like I like stand up, but they're a fan of it, right? So we'd go see a show here and there, right? Maybe somebody coming up to Slave Lake. Maybe we saw you at some point. Who knows? But the one that sticks out in my mind, it wasn't my first comedy show for sure, but it was, my parents saw Russell Peters somewhere. I can't remember where. Maybe it was down the States. I can't remember. But then he was coming back to Edmonton. It must have been one of his first times through Edmonton doing a decent sized show. And they brought me and my sister. Maybe a little too young to go to it, but it was just that feeling of watching this man take a whole arena of people and not only have amazing prepared stuff, but like just the crowd work and just to see how the crowd work would flow into the other of just like, he picked, 4 different people from completely different backgrounds and how the jokes were calling back to each other and just the amazing. But at no point in that, I was sitting there in awe as a kid, right? And then every time Russell Peters came back, my whole family went, we've never missed him when he's come, right? But at no point was I thinking, man, he gets paid to do this. It was just, he gets to do that. Like, look what he's doing. That is an amazing thing. Like at no point as a kid when I'd watch all these comedians and be just blown away and sitting there in awe, money never crossed my mind, right? Because it's so much more powerful than that. That is just a consequence, 4 or 5 steps down the ladder of the cool shit that you get from being a comedian, right? Yeah. The first is killing on stage, right? Like I've never done it myself, but from everything I've heard, like that is the number one, right? And then there's the cool thing. I mean, you've traveled the world. You've met so many cool people. Like there's so many things on that list before you get to money, right? And in fairness, money usually comes, 15 years down the pipeline of doing all that. And there's a lot of grind that comes with it. But it's just at no point does money even come into the situation when you're looking at that like that. But I think for so many people, just trying to put themselves into a place where they can take money off the board is so foreign to people because it's such a big part of society and just everybody looks through the lens of money. That's hard for people to understand that. And I know you get that because your whole livelihood is that really. And I get that because that's what I'm trying to dive into and what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah.
But for most people, I think it's really hard to explain.
Yeah. It's, I guess my parents were entertainers, so that certainly made it so that you could be an entertainer. And I watched my
that wasn't
parents.
as foreign to you as the average Joe.
Yeah. So they were professional musicians.
Yeah.
That was their job. And we'd be on the road 50 weeks.
What was their
a year.
band again?
Columbian Gold Rush.
Right.
Out of Fort St. John.
Right.
And traveled, that's all my family did was travel with the band. My mom taught us all school in hotel rooms from, for 7 years of my life. So that was like the professional side of it, like shine your shoes, iron your shirt.
The work ethic that came from it.
Really like treat it like a job. When I worked on the rigs, so I worked on a service rig while I was in university in my late, 18, 19, 20, 21, I was working on a service rig between school and university.
Yeah.
If somebody came into the doghouse and sat next to me and said, "Hey, how much was your last paycheck?" I would look at them and go, "You're never going to make it a week anyway."
Yeah.
Because I knew they wouldn't, because you wanted to do the work. All my friends worked in the oil patch. I wanted to work in the oil patch to do the work. I wanted to be good at the job. And I was focused on the quality of the job. The pay was, I think I was making $13.50 an hour, which in 1994 was all the money in the world.
Yeah.
Like, it was so much money. We did a lot of overtime. So it was like crazy money for, a kid back then. But when I see a comedian ask, they're like, "Hey, so, when was your first paid gig?" Like, I just want to make a little bit of money on the side. And I would just look at him and think to that kid in a doghouse who would never, the work was so hard that if you didn't get some pleasure out of the fact that you were building something, creating something, making something, that when you finished, there was a finished product that you looked and was that we did that. We got completed a well, and now it produced, and like that feeling of accomplishment.
Yeah.
In comedy, when somebody's like, "Hey, so what, I just want to I think it'd be a nice hobby to make a little money on the side." I always look at them and go, "You're never going to make any money anyway."
Yeah.
And I mean that,
or you're going to be miserable, or you will stick it out and you will hate it. I think that's the two things.
Their motivation is wrong. No, I don't think they'll make any money. Like, I will say this right now. Okay. If you want to get into comedy, and more normally I don't speak in like definites, like a real, to speak in, what's the word I'm looking for?
Absolutes?
Yeah, absolutes. Thank you very much. So to speak in an absolute, I'm like, leave it open-ended. Whatever. People can interpret it. I will say, I'll go on record as saying, if anybody's listening to this and you want to get into comedy specifically for money, you're never going to make any fucking money.
For sure.
I could say that as an absolute. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, you go on the road. I remember the first time I ever went on the road, I made $75, and I had to pay for the fuel to go to Fairview and my own dinner that night. And so by the time I got home, I remember I had spent $137 to make $75.
Yeah.
And the first 2 years, or maybe 3, the first 2 years going to Australia cost me real money.
Yeah.
4,000, 5,000, whatever it was. Year 3, I broke even. Year 4, I made money.
Nice.
Year 5, I was, scheduled to make more money than any of the other years, but it took my own money.
Yeah.
And at that point, I would have been 14 years into comedy, or, So I'm 14 years in, and now I'm paying for 3 months overseas to work again. Right. But I was trying to open up new things and go to new places. And now once you one of the so many cool things that have happened being in Singapore and having a guy come up to me and he's like, "Hey, I saw you the last time you were here. I saw your name on a poster. I brought all my friends to see you." And I remember just staring at this guy. I could still pick him out of a lineup.
Yeah.
I'm just staring at this guy. And I'm like, I have fans in Singapore.
That's a cool feeling,
It's bananas. It's absolutely bonkers. I'm like, this guy's like, "Oh yeah, I saw you the last time you were in Singapore. And so I really enjoyed your show. So I brought all my friends to come see you." I'm like, how the hell did some, idiot from Edmonton
pull this all together?
Yeah.
Right?
We end up with fans in Singapore. It was crazy.
And it's funny how, something like that is obviously going to hit you deep. But what I'm finding is even things that I never thought would be that cool, just because you're building it yourself and it's not tied to anything else. Like, I just got my first sponsor on the page. It's this restaurant in GP that I eat at every day, right? It's kind of a health food place. It's called Freshie. There's chains here too, but it's that local one. and just put it all together, a little deal. We're just talking one day with the owner. I just said, yeah, I'm looking, for sponsors on the podcast. Could you hook me up with someone with corporate so I could talk to them and see if maybe we could do a deal? And she said, yeah, like I'll start doing some contacts, but in the meantime, how about just to start, you can just advertise just for mine, and we'll give you a free meal a week. Perfect, right? Like, I'm over the moon by it. And I was just proud of myself. Just, I'm gaining the skill of bringing on sponsors and learning how to sell them and make sure it's coming from the heart. But when I went in for that first meal, and they, hey, it's free, and just, it's a free meal, right? It's $20. It's nothing huge. It doesn't change my life at all, but just that feeling because of where it came from and all the thing and all this year and a half of journey that built up to that one free meal, I felt like a fucking rock star. Yeah. And I texted her after. I said, I just had my first free meal. Like, thanks, Lori. Like, you're great. Cause she's awesome. The lady that runs it, she's just the bee's knees. And I just said, like, man, like, I don't think you understand how cool that felt. Like, that just, it probably means nothing to you. It's probably a write-off, right? Like, I'm hoping that they get more out of the advertisement than that meal cost them, right?
Yep.
But all that doesn't matter because the way it made me feel was so cool that that's all worth it, right? Like, all the other stuff is again, just secondary down that list, because the main thing is that feeling that it gives you, right? And just to comment on what you were saying about these guys, like, if you're not enjoying the work, like, you're never going to make it, right? And I think I agree with you, right? And especially with something like comedy, where if you're in it for the wrong reasons, but there's so many things, even if you are in for the right reasons, it's just a hard thing to do, and you're going to get knocked down. And if you do not love it with every fiber of your being, you're going to get knocked out of it. But I think what is lucky for a guy like you or me is we've had a taste of enjoying something, of a taste of enjoying work. And I think this goes back, it's funny that your parents, this back to you, but like, my parents were very much about working early, right? 12, 13 years old, getting a job, starting to do that, and really changing the dynamic of what work is. I feel like so many people don't get that. First that, but then also at some point in their life, finding someone they really enjoy. Yeah. Because I think that's what can knock you out of that frame of looking at everything through money, right? Like, say you get a job at McDonald's as a kid and you hate it and it makes this much money. So then you go, oh, well, this job sucks. Like, work sucks. I just know that work sucks and I get paid for it. So everything's looking through the lens of money. I make, $12 an hour at McDonald's, just throwing shit out there. And I can make $15 sweeping the floors at the shop down the street. I'm going to go do that. And I make $15 more and I hate it. And then they go, well, I can make $25 an hour on the regs. I'm going to go do that because clearly work just sucks. And I'm just going to hate everything. I might as well maximize the money I get for hating what this is. And they just can never snap out of that. Like, hey, maybe there's something I'm not going to hate. Even if I make 1/10 of the money, if I don't hate it, where's that trade-off to me?
Yeah.
Right? And they never get to experience that. So they're just kind of locked in this dynamic where they don't even know what's on the other side of it. And I feel very grateful to have this, because I think I felt like that for a long time. It was just kind of looking through the lens of money. Like, I remember in school, we did a project like, what do you want to do when you're older? And I picked like underwater welder and something else, because it's the highest things on the pay, right? You get paid, you can pay $400,000 a year being an underwater welder. I'd never welded in my life. I'd never scuba dived in my life, but I'm sure as shit I was going to be an underwater welder, right? But that's just kind of what you're taught. But now sitting where I am today and understanding way better with a little bit more life experience, I'm so thankful that I knocked myself off that path and I'm seeing things a little bit more clearly, or I think I see them clearly. You never really know until, check out and you can look back at your whole life. But.
Yeah. There's so many thoughts there as far as I've always been able, I've had the luxury, my parents didn't have a lot of money, but I always knew that I had something, like, if I knew they would bail me out if I needed it.
Right.
And knock on wood, I have not, needed it. I think my mom might have loaned me money once in my 20s, but
yeah.
Always had a job, like moved out of home when I was 17, but I always quit when something stopped being fun. Mm-hmm. So I liked working on the rigs. I enjoyed it. There was a sense of accomplishment when you finished something. Imagine like building a house or a road or I built something. I can look at it and it's a tangible object. With comedy, and podcasting, and it's a little harder to see those results. You know, like you can look, you could just look at your paycheck, but at the same time, exactly like you're saying. So I remember like the day that I quit on the rigs, I just had a couple days where I'm like, I wasn't really having fun. Yeah. And I just said to
and you recognize that?
Yeah. I remember in the truck on the way to work one morning, I just looked at the driller and go, I think today's my last day. And they were like, what are you going to do? And I went, not this.
Yeah.
And that was the end of it. And I did the exact same thing. I was a casino dealer for 6 years, over 6 years. Worked on cruise ships and really learned all the games. Like, I can deal every single game except for poker. I never wanted to deal poker because there was always 9 losers and 1 winner.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to deal poker. I have
too much negativity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you want to enjoy it.
Yeah. I want there to be a team effort.
Yeah.
And the idea of like 9 miserable people every single hand, and blackjack, everybody can win.
Yeah.
Craps, everybody can win. Roulette, everybody can win. So it's fun. But yeah, so I never dealt poker. I didn't like it. And I like the game. The game's fine. But as far as dealing poker, I would say to people, they go, how come you don't deal poker? I'd say, I'd rather iron the wrinkles out of my penis
than deal poker.
Yeah. So, I had come home from the cruise ships. It was December of 2002. I was like 6.5 years into being a dealer. And I realized I had learned everything that I wanted to learn. I've been a pit boss. I'd done everything I wanted to do and I'm like, there's no more challenges.
Yeah.
I was standing on a craps table, and it was a Saturday night, and the center action, so the hard ways and all the prop bets and all, like just heaving, like massive. This player rolls 2, so he rolls snake eyes. Table goes ballistic. And you have to pay 16 players, 18 players. Like normally there'd be 16 players to be capped on a Saturday night. Sometimes people would like wedge in somewhere. Mm-hmm. So there's like 17, 18 players. And I go around the table and I'm like, pay him $137, pay that person this. I backed you up. I pressed this. I went all the way around the table to every player, and I shipped the player the dice. And I said, do that again. And boom, 2 crap. The table, I mean, the loudest.
The casino
roar.
comes unglued.
Oh yeah. The roof comes off the place. And I remember paying all of the players without even it required no mental effort on my part. Pay this guy $251, and I pressed you this, and I backed you up that. Pay this, and then I like finished paying everybody, and I'm like, I'm done. Like I'm finished.
Yeah.
I don't like. I love this game. I love this job, but there's no. I'm not going anywhere now.
You've hit the highs.
That's it.
Yeah.
I'm done. And when I see somebody who's a bad craps dealer, I always want to make the move out of the way. I'm like, I can't deal this. This is
tough to watch, eh?
I love that game so much. There's a guy, I'll say comedian. There's a guy named John Holland who was a true legend as a craps dealer on Royal Caribbean, regarded as the best, if not one of the best craps dealers on the cruise ships of all time. He married a woman from Edmonton. So John and Rhonda married. He moves here. Yeah. They didn't make him the supervisor of craps. They put him as a dealer. So we got to watch a guy who was the best dealer, arguably one of the best in the world, deal with us as we were all starting out. He had these moves and these, like, it was so incredible. It was like watching magic. It was mesmerizing. And to see his attention to detail. You know when you see Connor McDavid working on stuff the same way Gretzky would, like the way Gretzky used to do this move where he'd bank it off the back of the net. Like the player would go for the puck and he'd bounce it off like if he was behind the net, he'd bounce it off the net and then go around the player. Like those little moves that they would have practiced again and again and again, the lacrosse, any of those things. John Holland was the Wayne Gretzky was the Mario Lemieux of craps, of Steve Yzerman. He did things that you wouldn't even have imagined. Yeah. And because we got to watch him every day, 7 hours a day, deal this game, and we were dealing alongside him, the craps crew at the Palace Casino, I would put against, if somebody's like, okay, you got to pick a craps crew.
Pick an all-star team.
For your life. I would pick those dealers from that time at the Palace Casino, and he's so good, just incredible to watch. And I don't know if anybody, your listeners, play craps, but okay, I'm gonna just walk. There's this what you can do. It's actually, you shouldn't do it. Like, it's not right as far as the order of operations that you would when you'd be dealing craps. But if somebody has a come bet, so there'd be a point. So like the shooter's trying to get a 6. There's a point. If the shooter rolls a 7. Everybody loses everything. 7 out, right? So 7 out, everything gets picked up. Well, if they have a come bet, if they had let's just say $5 bet in the come, it's just a wagers in craps.
Fair enough. I won't make any jokes.
That particular bet would win.
Yeah.
So if there was a player who was a bit of a know-it-all, they'd come up to your table and you could see him, a bit of a bravado, bit of like machismo, like, I know this game, I know everything. What you can do, and John Holland taught us that, showed me this move. You pick up their pass line bet and you take their come bet. So you essentially took a winning bet. Yeah. Okay. So you've taken, again, I'll try and get through this. So you've taken a winning bet, but what you've done is you've left $10 in front of them that you would normally have picked up. Yeah. So you pick up a winning bet, but you leave what would have been a losing bet. And the player would, thinking they know the game better than you.
Come unglued.
Yeah, they go, hey, you took my comeback. You took my comeback. And I would just look at the player and go, you want to see a magic trick? And the player would look at you. I'd look down at their odds behind the line, which would be what they would have won.
Yeah.
And then they wouldn't fuck with you again because they were like, okay,
took my swing.
You think you know this game better than me? I'm about to show you up in a way where you're like, you're going to look like you're kicking off because you think you lost this bet, and I'm going to just look at you and go, it's right there. And they're like, fuck, what? And they're like, okay. And now they get it. They're like, oh, this guy's slick. Like this is somebody who knows what they're doing. And all that was watching John Holland. So the idea of like, and the day that I finished at the casino, I just went up to the games manager and I said, I think today's my last day.
Yeah.
And they said, what are you going to do? And I just went, not this.
Yeah.
And I walked away from it. So to have to know exactly, like you said, when these people are like, I guess work just sucks.
Exactly.
For me, I'm like, no, work is fun. And I wanted to be great at it. The casino, when I was learning roulette, the casino used to let me go in an hour before the casino opened and stay an hour after just to practice. Nice. And I'll practice every day. Practice. Same with comedy. I just wanted to be good at it because I love it. But that practice, I never associated the money. That's not what motivated me.
You want to be good at it.
I wanted to be good at whatever I was doing. And I was motivated by the quality of the work, which I've been so blessed. So there's this Alan Watts thing called What If Money Were No Object? So I'm not going to play the whole thing, but I recommend, so write this down. If you got a pen or a note.
I sure do.
You can write down what if money were no object? Or what if money was no object? So this is an Alan Watts thing where he talks about, this is an ad to start, but
gotta love those.
Yeah. So
money was no object. Beautiful.
What makes you itch? What sort of a situation would you like? Let's suppose, I do this often in vocational guidance of students. They come to me and say, well, we're getting out of college and we haven't the faintest idea what we want to do. So I always ask the question, what would you like to do if money were no object?
So he goes on to say exactly what you said in that. And I like to quote, find something you love so much that you would do it for free, then figure out a way to get paid for it. And getting a free sandwich for doing something that you absolutely love.
Exactly.
How is this even a thing? Go to Freshie, Grand Prairie, finest shop. And that as that comes a little more, and people go, oh, hey, I see some benefit. Not only is he mentioning me, but we're getting some customers. So, hey, if you're going by there, pop in and say like, hey, I heard you on the podcast, and that will make a difference, and it snowballs a little bit. And now you're getting paid to do this thing that you would do for free. Exactly. And there's so much joy in that. When you talk about taking a step back from, you're like, okay, so maybe I make 1/10 of what I would make, but there's so much joy. When I think about this, Alan Watts goes on to say, like, do what you love, the money will come.
Yeah.
Everybody is interested in something. If you become a master of that thing, he says, you have to be really with it and to pour your heart and soul into it and to fight through all those obstacles. And once there is success, once you push through that and there's some success, financial or just recognition or whatever the case is, then the sense of accomplishment in those moments, you're like, I've fucking did it.
I did it. Yeah, exactly.
It's so surreal. And so I feel like I have a Volkswagen Jetta.
Right.
My Volkswagen Jetta has 722,000 kilometers on it. I think it's funny when we go, oh yeah, well my blah, blah, blah has 800,000. I go, well, my car's 11 years old. How old's your car?
Yeah.
They're like 25 years old. I'm like, yeah, we're not doing the same thing.
Yeah. You're not a comedian, are you?
Yeah. So I don't know. That's my one point of pride is this Volkswagen Jetta with 722,000 kilometers on it. So Volkswagen is putting the car in a commercial. So if you Google Volksgiving, like Thanksgiving, Volksgiving, you'll see them giving like prizes. They're recognizing some of their customers. And so we're doing the interview for the commercial. Yeah. And they're like, so if you could have anything you wanted, what would you want? And I'm like, I don't want anything.
Yeah. I'd like to get a couple more years out of this Jetta, but other than that, I'm pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't want to see like, oh, hey, we're going to do something to recognize you and you're going to get this cool gift. Mm-hmm. I'm like, well, the gift is a car that is reliable. It's the original engine, original transmission, 722,000 kilometers. I already won.
Yeah.
And
a couple times over here.
A couple times over. That's exactly how I feel. Yeah. So I didn't want to, like, I didn't want to not say, like, hey, this gift is amazing. But at the same time, I'm like, hey, Volkswagen, we're good.
Yeah. We'll call this one even.
Yeah. Like, I'm good with you. You're good with me. Okay. Well, let's just continue on with that. The other stuff, I almost feel like I'm like, but I don't deserve it. All I did was, so let me get this straight. I drove 722,000 kilometers because I love my job. And that means I got to drive to shows. And all over North America, from Los Angeles to Whitehorse, Yukon, to Alaska, to Chicago, to St. Louis, and I got to drive this like car that I like. And then they're like, hey, we're going to give you something because you drove your car. I'm like, but I like driving the car. That was its own reward. I don't need another reward. Yeah. And I it was hard for me to act like, because I'm like, I already feel so lucky.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to get more, like, I mean, I guess everybody does kind of, but I'm like, I'm the luckiest person in the world.
I don't want to push it here.
Yeah. Let's just be grateful for what we have. All this other stuff is cake. Like it's all a bonus. It's all cherry on top.
And gratefulness. I mean, this is definitely just my opinion, but for some reason, from what I've seen in my 28 years, is that gratefulness begets luck. Right?
Oh, yeah.
The more grateful you are for what you have, the more luck that's going to come your way, right? And if you start getting a little bit ungrateful or something, that luck might change, right? And you can call that karma, you can call that whatever you want. But I think those two things are hooked a little bit more than people would maybe hope they would be, for their own personal sake, right? Like, I think that is huge, to be able to force yourself to remain grateful. It sounds like it comes very natural to you, especially with the life you've lived. But I think for some people, that's a good lesson to learn. Is just, man, the more grateful I can be, the better things are going to turn out. The more you can look around and just pick out the things you're happy for and thankful for, right? Like, it doesn't have to be once a year around Thanksgiving that you do that practice, right? It's amazing how much. And the other part of it too is like the scientific evidence that's coming out now with gratefulness practices, and and I mean, it comes along with meditation, but what they're finding is meditation has all these amazing benefits. But they're saying even not meditation, just some sort of gratefulness practice every day has these amazing health and mental health benefits. And it's like, man, how has it taken us this long? It's like we learned all this for thousands and thousands of years, forgot it really quick, and now science is remembering it again. Like, it's so funny to watch these patterns of humans have known that for years, right? The importance of being grateful.
Yeah.
And then we kind of forgot it. And now it's coming back, and you attach some scientific studies to it, and people, it really connects and they believe it a little bit more. Whereas, I don't know, it seems like that wouldn't be something you have to really argue that hard to teach people, really.
Yeah. I think a comparison is the thief of joy. Mm-hmm. So I think that people often compare themselves to what they see other people having on social media.
For sure.
Whether somebody's going on a trip or getting a new car or, going to a concert with Grace, whatever it is, you look at that and go, oh, I don't have that. Whereas if you turn away from that screen and you look behind you and go, oh, I have so much.
Yeah.
And I hate to be cliche. If with my radio show,
cliche for a reason.
Yeah. The idea of, I want it to be compelling. Like, tell me something that's compelling. Like, if you're listening to the show, you're like, give me some juice. Like, give me something that's like compelling. The drives in comedy, and so if you're doing Winnipeg, they'll give you some travel money. You get like $500 for travel to go to the comedy club for a week, so you can pay for a flight.
Yeah.
But I find if I'm leaving Edmonton, I can do a gig in Saskatoon or Regina, and then I'm on my way to Winnipeg. I get to keep that $500 plus the money I made along the way,
and the friends.
Yeah. And then you have your car while you're there. So whenever I'm in Winnipeg, so if you message me on @extra_Lars anywhere and you're going to a city, I'll tell you my favorite things to do. And I mean, from Saskatoon to New York to Sydney, Australia, to Adelaide, to Perth, to Ho Chi Minh, to Hanoi. I'll tell you my favorite part about being in Houston is this, or my favorite part about Seattle was this place called the Lunchbox Laboratory. So all of these, like the best burger here, the best pizza here, all of those things, I'm like, hey, I'll tell you some fun stuff.
Yeah.
When I get to a city, the first thing I do, it's like a big city, is I go on a bus tour. And I always tell people, if you're first time in Chicago, if you're first time in Seattle, I go on a bus tour.
Great way to get around.
Well, you're going to see things that, like on the tour, you're going to be like, oh shit, I didn't know that was there. I want to go see that. So if you go the first day, if you take the tour halfway through or at the end, maybe you don't have time to do the things that you would have seen on the tour. Get there, just get on one of those double-decker buses. You're going to get your...
We do that as a family. Every time we go somewhere, Lars, that's the first thing we do is hop on it, and that's what plans the trip out of. You see certain things. It gives you a little bit of a geographical map of kind of, a couple landmarks. You learn something. Hopefully, if you get a good guide that does it well. Some of them are always the automated ones, but over the years, you've got some great ones. Actually, I've heard a bunch of comedians talk about that's what they used to do when they're first starting comedy, and they would want to, make a little money on the side, is they'd run those tours, because they said you can almost run bits, right? And like, depending on the crowd, you can maybe push it too far. But he said with some of the groups, you can almost do your stand up, right? And that's all most comics are looking for, stage time, right? If you can get paid for it, right? And it's on the top of a bus, they don't care. It's still a microphone in their hand, right? It's still stage time.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. Winnipeg has a great deli.
Oh yeah.
There's a good poutine shop there. Those are popping up all over the place now.
Yeah.
But there was one of the first was in Winnipeg. The Museum of Human Rights in Winnipeg.
It's a beautiful building. I've never been in it.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I drove by it a bunch.
Yeah. And all of those little different things, like, so you get to a city, like, hey, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then I have the Mint, the Canadian Mint.
Yeah, I drove by that a couple times there.
I wrote a joke for the Canadian Mint. I emailed it to them.
Yeah.
So all of the coins in Canada, every single coin you have in your pocket or anywhere, all your spare change is made in Winnipeg. So there's also a mint in Ottawa, but they only make commemorative coins there. So anything in circulation was made in Winnipeg. And the joke I wrote was, so what you're telling me is change must come from within. And I'm like, put it in your little tour. I'm because they do a little tour, and you're like, once they say that, I go, change must come from within. I'm like, you'll get a little chuckle.
Yeah.
I never heard back. So
never heard back.
Yeah.
Eh?
If anybody works for the Canadian Mint, I was giving you that free of charge.
Yeah.
And you guys print money, so
exactly. Oh, that's hilarious. It's interesting to hear you talk about. A bunch of things have all kind of lined this up in my head, and I'll see if I can round them all up to make one point. But something I learned, I've known this before, but what really drove it home for me was I was reading George St. Pierre's book, right? Real famous Canadian MMA fighter. And he was talking about his training regimen. He's such a hyper intelligent guy, and he does things, and he changed the entire game of how he went about stuff. And everyone just copied what he did because he was on such the cutting edge of everything. And at one point he had to get knee surgery, and he was out, and he was really struggling with that that was his first time being like completely automatic. He was always trained through injuries. He'd figure stuff out. But what he was doing was just going to the gym and just watching. He'd sit there, rehabbing his knee, maybe stretching, but just watching all these people spar and fight and do jiu-jitsu. And he realized how much he was getting. He's saying it's, putting 8 hours in the gym watching is not the same as 8 hours in the gym training, but it's not nothing. Maybe it's 10%, if you put, 10 hours in the gym and it's 10% of it, that's like training 1 hour. And if that's all you got, right? And to hear you talk about doing the radio show, right? We already said that's different skills, but maybe there's some crossover, right? And if you put in, a couple 100 hours over some years at a radio show, that's also going to, level up your stand-up, maybe 3 or 4 hours of practice, right? I'm being very esoteric with this stuff, but and then same thing with, when you're talking about dealing craps, you probably were learning a ton by actually, going in early, practicing. But when that gentleman came and you got to watch him, and you can see those steps of those huge steps forward, right?
Oh yeah.
And that's what I'm interested in right now is like, I know that to put it in the comedy lens of, what stage time is this, right? Getting on the mics with this, but what are the things like, how much does listening to a podcast count? Because I listen to a ton, right? And maybe that's only 1%. Maybe I have to listen to 100 hours of podcasting for 1 hour of, doing podcasts. Who knows where that lies? But I don't think it's nothing. But now it's all about like the viewpoint you look at everything through, because I've been feeling very lazy this month, right? With stepping back from work, and I'm so used to having a huge amount of my time locked in with this work stuff, and that's what drags everything too. And now to be kind of open back up, and I can kind of do whatever I want. And I'm supposed to be working on the podcast with all my time, but I find myself, catching up on all these podcasts I miss and all these things. And I'm trying to find the right way to frame it of not being dishonest with myself, to be lazy of like, oh no, I'm not just being lazy listening to podcasts. I'm working right now, right? Because I don't want to do that, but I also don't want to devalue it to the point where I'm not actually looking at things correctly and not like being efficient with my time, because I'm either giving too much to something or too little to something. And then it's about balancing out what are all these things that I can get something out of? Because like, to me, the best thing is going to be hopping on a podcast. Secondaries, listening to some, but I still don't think that's that great. But, if I start streaming video games online and I'm in front of an audience and I have a chat there, well, that seems a little bit closer to it, right? Like, if ever I could get the balls to try stand up one day, right? Like, that's not podcasting, but the vulnerability you need to bring and the lessons to teach you, I don't think that's zero overlap. And it's like, how can I create my life so that everything I'm doing, A, I'm enjoying it, right? Like we said, I think that's the first thing, but then B, is it somehow coming back? Is it adding to my overall goal, right? Is it making me a better person? Is it making me better in that way? And I feel like that's something I'm right in the middle of. So I'm kind of trying to figure it out on the fly, but also I feel like it's very important to figure this out because I think it's going to be very important for my long-term growth to get all those things kind of laid out and established and a good understanding of how much is going into it. If I really like streaming, but it's not really giving me that much towards my goal, but or maybe I really like stand up, but it doesn't give me as much as streaming. I need to do things that way. You know what I'm saying? I'm curious.
So it's about deliberate practice.
Right.
So it's not practice that makes perfect. People are like, practice makes perfect. Practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. If you're George St. Pierre, you watching those people, what you learn is you see sometimes when it's done correctly or when it's done incorrectly. You see the flaws. You see when somebody has a high level of skill, you go, oh, that's okay. I never
see flaws in your own game too,
because you realize that your movement is that way. So when it comes to feeling guilty that I'm not working on this hard enough, there's a couple of you have to be your own worst critic. You have to be the one to push yourself really hard. You have to be. If I see a comedian that doesn't beat themselves up after a bad set, we're like, oh man, I'm like, that's how you have to do it.
That's how you get better.
Yeah, it's the only way. Mm-hmm. So when you're listening to those other podcasts, and allow yourself to be present in that. Oh, I'm just going to enjoy this.
Yeah,
but then you can also apply the perfect practice rule. What is that? But the allowing yourself, like, let's just enjoy this. You can say that I am doing some work to try and keep it intense, where every second of every day has to be accounted for. I'm not using my time, economically. I should commit more time to this. I should spend more time on this. That's all great. But what'll happen, I think, is it'll take some of the joy away from it. So when you're listening to a podcast, go, oh yeah, just enjoy this.
Yeah.
Just enjoy it. And then the other thing would be to go, okay, now I can make some notes on, I'm enjoying this. What do I like that this person's doing? What do I not like that this person's doing? And then it becomes deliberate practice. It's perfect practice. Yeah. So when you're working on those things, you're like, oh, let's do this. There's where I got that line. There was a guy who has the world record for like the most free throws sunk. There's this guy who's like, he was a coach, but he'd like sunk thousands and thousands of free throws in a row. And he's like, anybody can just go and try and shoot free throws. But if you work on the perfect practice of it, like bend your knees, use your legs, follow through, all of those things, it's the perfect practice in something.
Yeah.
So if somebody wants to be a ballroom dancer, if you can just go wing it and just waltz around, or no, that was no pun intended, but, or you can go, okay, this is what I need to do in order to work this way with my partner. It's deliberate practice. So I love the idea of somebody living life passionately, doing what they love. I love the idea of you like, okay, I've taken a step back from my work and now I'm going to focus on this podcast that I love so much, because there's real reward in when that pays off. But also it was the deliberate practice leading up to that moment where you're like, okay, I think I'm getting good at this now.
Yeah.
And I finally... I was 4.5 years in when I felt like I was getting good.
Yeah.
Like I was like, okay, I'm kind of getting good at comedy. Then 10 years in, you hit another level where you're like, oh, I'm getting pretty good.
Yeah.
Last year at 17 years, for the first time in my 17 years, I'm like, oh, I'm pretty good at this.
Yeah.
And it's the first, when I'm I just did a show in Wolseley, Saskatchewan, and it was a Saturday night in a small town. So it's always going to be a pretty hot crowd.
Yeah.
Almost always. And it was, I walked off that stage and I'm like, I don't know if I could have done better than that. It was a smoking show, but I'm like, all of my years of deliberate practice to become good at this, I finally 17 years in went, oh, Yeah. I'm pretty good at this.
Yeah.
Like, and now when like I'm headlining the comic strip in West Edmonton Mall tomorrow, Wednesday. So it's like, it'll be over by the time this is up. But as I go into that show, there's a couple of new jokes that I want to make sure I get to. And I've learned in doing the virtual shows that my posture wasn't great. So I remind myself to stand up a little straighter, to put my shoulders back, to smile a little more when you see yourself on a virtual, because you're watching yourself on the virtual screen, to realize that I wasn't smiling as much as I needed to.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, so all of those things that happened throughout the pandemic have made me 20% better than I ever was. And I never would have thought about those things until I was staring at a screen of myself the whole time, being like, this guy doesn't look like he's having as much fun as he is. I know how much fun he's having. But I want that
to be conveyed.
Yeah, really, truly. Yeah. So I whatever it is you want to do, go listen to that Alan Watts, What If Money Were No Object, because I want people to be like, oh shit, I'm making more money now than I ever would have at a day job. You know, I worked for a power company. I was, sitting at a desk doing fine, and I make double what I was making there now, and doing what I love. Like every day I'm like, and
it's all about the way you look at it, because like what I left was what so many people dream of. Like, it was a great job. Like, it was, high stress, high intensity, just you're wearing a bunch of different hats and all that comes with it. But, what I was paid to do that job was very healthy. Like, I'm not going to lie. Like I was very well paid for what I did. It was, the enjoyment wasn't there. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back at the end of the day. But if I look at it through that lens of like, okay, well now this is what I was making before. I have to make that with the podcast. To make a podcast make the money I was making at that job, it would be one of the best, one of the best podcasts in the world. So but I know that going into it, that's not what I'm after, right? Like, if I can make a 10th, right, which would still be, this podcast would be, in a way different place if it made a 10th of what I made there, in a year here. But even if I don't get close to that, I would take making $2,000 a year on this podcast over, $1 million a year doing any other job, right? And that's what matters. And as long as you're looking through it at that lens, now it doesn't really matter. Now it's about convincing other people that you're not crazy, right? Like, your parents look at you like, okay, like, you can say that all you want, but you got to live, you need food. And I'm like, yeah, like I understand that too. And I know that that's a little bit hyperbolic to say that way, but I think it's a mindset you need to ride if you want to achieve the highs in an artistic venture. I think that's kind of the mindset you need to have. And from what I've watched and what I learned, like, if I run out of money at one point and I need to go get a job, I also feel I could walk in anywhere and be an amazing asset to anybody's company right now. But like I've told, I wouldn't go back and just do something because of the dollar amount there. Like, right now, if I need to go back and get a job, my first stop would be Rick Bronson's at West Ed. And I would ask, what do you need? You need a bartender, you need this, you need that. It doesn't matter what it is. I just want to be around a comic club, and I'm going to do it. Same as you, I'm going to work hard at whatever you give me, and I'm going to do over and above that, right? Or I'm going to go to a local MMA show that's, a Canadian mixed martial arts show. Go work for them. What do you need? Announcers, like business side. Like, I have a business degree. I have all this stuff to give you guys, but I'm going to do it in something that I enjoy, right? And I've learned that lesson now, right? Like, money has a place in the world. It just doesn't need to be at the very, very top. And I think that's the biggest lesson. And people think, like, if it's not at the top, it's gone. You don't even think about money. It's like, no, you think about money too. And that's definitely a vision. I'm trying to build this up so that it can make money too. Like, it is there. It's just not the top. It's just down a couple rungs, right? Like, there's happiness, there's mental health, there's your family, there's relationships, and then money, right? Which I don't think is that crazy of a step, but just for so many people that have never experienced anything but money at the apex, that's a very scary thought. And it really calls into question a lot of the way they view the world, and a lot of the decision making that they use depends on that money being the apex. And that's what qualifies a lot of the decisions they make and qualifies some of the unhappiness that they feel. But like, I'm not that happy in what I'm doing right now, but that's what you do, right? Everyone, sacrifices for the coin at the end of the day. And when you see someone not doing that, it's kind of scary. And I feel like that's something that I've been battling a little bit with this change of, I think some people just said, like, straight up, like, are you crazy? You know what I would do to get that job that you had and stuff? It's like, yeah. And I totally appreciate that. And I'm very grateful for what I had and all the lessons that I learned. But, like, would you really kill to have that job? Like, you never did that job. You didn't know how much you'd enjoy it. You don't know what the stress that comes with that job. Like, you're just kind of guessing that you would. And that guess is coming, I think, a lot from the dollar amount, right? At the end of the day, like, what else do you know about the job other than it pays well? And it's like, I don't quite know if you think that is true. I think you're just a little bit upset that somebody's worldview is very different from yours.
Yeah, the outside the box thinker. You know, it's like in Steve Martin's book Born Standing Up, he goes, it wasn't these wild leaps. It was like incremental throughout the entire time, basically just small steps throughout the entire thing. And that, like, as you just take, like I'd say, you know, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Yeah. You just take your time and do it. But the amount of fulfillment, the amount of joy, the amount of real happiness, and possibly more money than you could ever imagine doing the thing you love. Working with horses, being, you know, doing woodwork.
With kids.
Yeah, I dated this girl when I was in university, and her dad was a teacher, and he hated it. So he was a shop teacher, and he hated his job. Did it for 35 years till he retired. Hated it. But he had a wood shop in his garage, and he made these incredible, cabinets or drawers or whatever, like dressers, like anything. He was incredible at it. If he would have focused his time and energy on woodworking, I think he would have made double, quadruple, 5 times the 5 times the money he would have been making as a teacher, and he would have been in love with what he did in this shop, working every day, doing.
And probably would have been a different person too.
I think so. And to be like 35 years, like, oh, I hate this. It's, you know, going to work is tedious. It's grind. And I respect. People have bills, they have mortgages, they have kids, they have family, you know, so they have obligations, and I respect that. So I don't want to say like, well, just quit your day job and go become a salsa dancer. But at the same time, if you really love salsa dancing and you have some sort of an aptitude for it, if you poured yourself into that, I think you would be surprised at the level of success that you could have. And
I think exactly the same way. And where I come to is also just, I think there's a super big piece of importance that needs to be put on telling that message to people young enough before those obligations get in, because that's something like, I want kids really bad. I love kids. I always have, and seeing lots of my friends have kids right now, it's killing me. I would love to have kids. Am I ready for it? Hell no. Right. And I don't think you're ever ready. So kind of take that off the table. But I know that if I was to have a kid tomorrow and I was still working, I would never have made that leap. I would never leave that job with all the money and stuff. And I would never begrudge anyone else for doing it, but recognize that in myself of, okay, if I want kids this bad, well, then I got to take these crazy leaps and at least get them started, or at least give them a try. So I'm never kicking myself in 20 years saying, well, why didn't you try it? Right. And at least at that point, now I can go into the, you know, trying to have kids and I don't have anything hanging over me. And I think that's a very important message, because I kind of figured out where I got that message was from podcasting, right? Listening to mostly comedians, because when I first started listening to podcasts, that's all I listened to was just comedians. Hearing them talk about that and hearing, you know, these comedians may not have, you know, the 30 years in a wood shop experience like we're talking about, but they sure meet a lot of people. They talk to a lot of people. And they have a lot of life experience. They have a lot of wisdom to give. And I found like just the amount of wisdom that I downloaded from the time I graduated university and found podcasts to the time I, you know, till today. I learned so much in that chunk of time from podcasts and from these amazingly wise people, like 10-fold more than university, you know, 50-fold more than high school. It's amazing how much you can download from that. But that changed my whole life of how who I was before this, when I didn't even know these things called podcasts existed, right? They were just out in the ether. I'd heard them mention, but you know, if I would have maybe found them 2 years earlier, where can my life be now? Because like the rate I could feel myself leveling up and gaining intelligence and gaining wisdom it was crazy. It was like, man, I wish I would have found that earlier. And now it's, how can I help be a force to whatever that lesson is, when you dial all those lessons that come together to make you kind of realize that about chasing your dreams. How can we bring that to people earlier so they're not realizing that at 40? They're not realizing it at 50. They're realizing it at 15, at 16, right? When all those obligations are a little bit farther off into the future. That's kind of what I'm after. And I think I heard you mention it once. I don't know if it was a podcast, maybe we did, or maybe it was listening to someone else, but you're talking about the radio show and how one of the biggest pieces you get out of it is highlighting other people that you want to bring to the world. And that's the biggest part of this is like, and what I loved about podcasts was to hear somebody like Joe Rogan have a real affinity for some author that wrote this one book and get to share that with the world and bring that to everybody. Like, God, that is just the coolest idea. And that's something that I'm really excited to do at some point. Right. And like, it's so much more that's not money. That's not fame. That's not anything. That's the joy of spreading good ideas or something, like, I don't know, but just to show that there's value in things like that, and not just money. It doesn't just have to be money. Money's great, like we said, but you can value other things, and it doesn't need to be made fun of. It doesn't need to be looked at funny. It doesn't need to be, an outcast from society. That's just a different way to do it. And that's what I'm hoping to kind of send the message to people. And I think that just comes with time of trying and failing and getting back up, dusting yourself off, and trying to keep proving the point, because you know what? I believe in all that stuff I just said to the ends of the world. And I believe exactly what you said of, I'm passionate about this and I love it. I know the money's going to come, that the success, that all is going to come in the future. And to really believe that and just keep dusting yourself off at every point until that comes, that's what it's all about. It's just the one foot in front of the other, one day after the next, of just keeping on doing it and keeping that belief and not losing faith, which is funny that it all kind of comes back to faith in the end, but like just trusting the method more than anything. Right. And I think that's really big with comedy, right? When you tell these young comics, it's just about stage time, just keep doing it. As long as you trust the method, and you have, like you say, you might need some sort of aptitude and some sort of, steel inside you to keep you doing it. But if you do, there's good things waiting at the end of that rainbow.
Yeah. And the process, when you're in that process and you come up with a joke, and then you got to polish it and edit it and, trim it down, or figure out which word is the best word to go in a particular place. As you learn those things, what your reason for doing that is because if you get better, you get to do it more. Right. So it's the idea of,
I loved what you said about that.
Yeah. You just like, oh, if I'm really good at this, then people want to hire me. People want to follow me. People want to associate with me. People want to do business with me. I like, when it comes to doing business with people, as far as somebody booking a show, I give away too much, which I have the luxury of being able to do. So the town of Whitecourt wanted to do a show last September, and they said, okay, we want to book this show. Things are just starting to open up. Like, we don't know. And I go, well, first of all, if it gets canceled because of COVID, I'm going to give you all your money back. Second, let's do a door deal. Let's just straight up charge $20 a ticket. Yeah. I'll take the tickets. I go, you're not assuming any risk. Yeah,
it's completely off your back.
Yep. I'm assuming all of the risk on this because I want to do the work, and I believe it'll sell. I believe it, it's going to be a good thing. So that, to be able to assume that, like, I'm like, I can do that. When it comes to doing the business, when people do business with me, I was talking to this guy about a show last night, and I'm like, I don't want your money one time. I want your money 10 times. Yeah. I want your money every time. And I can't do the show every year. When I do a show for somebody, I'll do the show that year, if it's your company Christmas party or whatever it is. Then a year later, Kelly Taylor can go do it, or Ken Valgertson, or another comedian can go do it, and then it'll come back to you in 2 or 3 years or whatever. But it's doing good business and establishing like that trust. Yeah. And once they trust you, and they, there's actually, just made me think of a joke. There's this movie called, I think it's called I Am Comic. And the guy who he's on there, and he goes, finally had some success in comedy, and I wrote my mom a check for $5,000. And this is not my joke, as a comedian on that movie. He goes, I just felt so good to give her that $5,000 check. And that check bounced. It was nice to fuck her over one more time.
Oh, that's funny.
That's a good joke.
And it's interesting to hear you frame it in the sense of you work so hard on your comedy because the better you do, the more opportunities you have to do what you love again, right? And I love that idea. And I feel like it dovetails with my journey a lot. But the difference is, with stand-up, you get those moments of feedback, very clear. A bomb, or whether you bomb or kill, it's going to be very clear, right? There's no ifs, ands, or buts. It's pretty there's a lot of politics in comedy that people wouldn't expect. But as soon as you kind of get on stage and the mic's in your hand to the time you get off stage and the mic comes out of your hand, it's pretty much a meritocracy, right? If you're funny, you're funny. And I love that, right? And that kind of allows you to judge. But what I'm finding with this podcast is, in the very same way, all I'm concerned of is making the best podcast people enjoy, because they're going to want to come back for it. But I never really get to see how it does. I do, in the sense of every once in a while you get these amazing messages from people. Hey, I really enjoyed the so-and-so podcast and I really listened to this, or hey, I've been listening all week. I've listened to 4 episodes this week. Like, keep it up. You get that kind of feedback, but it's hard to tweak and to find your own voice with that lack of feedback. And I'm just, in my own head, often I find to try and find that equivalent of what is that? And the only thing I can come up with so far is live podcasting is just, start, like you say, do a door deal with someone, probably do it in Slave Lake where I know the people, I know the venue, and I can just say, I'm going to bring someone on stage and we're going to talk for 2 hours, and you can sell drinks. You can do all that. You keep all that. I just want to get some feedback, and then maybe I can start seeing it that way. But other than that, I can't really think of any ways to start bringing direct feedback right back into it. And I feel like I'm always jealous of these podcasters that are comedians because they get to, work on their podcast all that. And then every weekend they go out and it's not exactly feedback, but you run into so many people that are in connection with you. You get some of that feedback in there. And I'm just trying to think of ways that I can.
What if you had a voicemail and people could leave you a voicemail message with something they liked or didn't like?
Yeah.
You could say, like, I want you to tell me something you liked about the show and something you didn't like about the show.
Yeah.
And they could just call the number.
That's a great idea.
And then you can get, their thoughts on it. I liked this part. I didn't like this part. I liked this part.
Or I could just start doing stand-up.
I can definitely. That's
one of these days. One of these days, Lars. I promise. It's a scary thing.
Yeah.
Do you remember the first time you went up? Mm-hmm. Or was it in Edmonton here?
Yeah, but I grew up on stage with my parents' band.
Right. I guess that's a little different, hey?
So I won the drama award in junior high.
Right,
right. So I've been on stage my whole life.
Okay, so it was a little bit different. Well, then how about maybe I can switch to this, because this is another thing I want to talk to you. One of the biggest things, again, as a fan of comedy and just listening to all these podcasts, the specials, right? Getting material down on paper is the wrong word, but just getting it documented somehow, and what a crucial step that is in terms of your evolution as a comic, and how special it is because of, like we've talked about, I think maybe more so on the last podcast, but this podcast as well, just everything that goes into being a comedian, right? Like we've talked about a lot of the positive, but there's a lot of grind, there's a lot of bullshit you got to slog through. And that all kind of culminates in this piece of work that you get to put out. And then hopefully, like you said so eloquently, right? You put it out in the hopes that you get to do more of it in the future. What was that experience like of getting your first special? How was it recording it? Did it mean all that to you? Was it a little bit different? Like, how did that process go? I'm curious to ask you about that.
So the Comedy Now special on the Comedy Network, they ran for 14 seasons or 15 seasons, 14, I think. So I did season 11. So Russell Peters, it was, his second Comedy Now that really blew him up. That's one of the things that made him be. YouTube was just new and he was massive. Like, so Russell Peters, somebody going to get hurt real bad like that. Absolutely blew him up. So the Comedy Network would record about 10 to 12 of these every year. So there would be, and they still air them on the Comedy Network. So you would, like, the Millen, who was like the head of the Comedy Network now, he was the guy who ran Comedy Now. Millen Curry Sharples, great guy. I really, really like that guy. So he would come out for a showcase. So there'd be a Comedy Now showcase. He'd go all the way across Canada, Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, but like, work his way across the country. If you liked what you did, you had to submit a somewhat longer tape, like instead of your 7 minutes, then you'd send him like half an hour or something. So then he would, okay, yep, you're ready for your special. I remember like having really worked hard from year. So for the first year I like dabbled because it was open mic and there wasn't a lot of open mics in Edmonton. So I just kind of dabbled a bit. Year 2 through 10, I was doing 450 sets a year, just banging them out everywhere I could get on stage. I got an opening job at the River Cree. I opened for Martin Short, and then I opened for Joan Rivers and Bob Saget. And I remember I had auditioned a couple of times for a Comedy Now, and I was on stage at Martin Short, and I was so comfortable. The crowd was laughing very hard, and I was so comfortable. I remember like waiting for them to finish laughing, and I went, I'm ready for my comedy special. Yeah. And I got it in 2011. I think I taped it, and I felt like the material was ready. It was polished. I felt good about it. The crowd was one of the hottest crowds I've ever had in my life.
Really?
Yeah, you're in the MTV building in Toronto. They give you a personal assistant. They put you up in a 5-star hotel. Wow. They fly you out there. You like it. It's so funny because the personal assistant that was like with you the whole time, I was like, they're like, what can I do for you? I'm like, no, just relax. And then I needed a glass of ice for a Red Bull before the show started. So they got me a glass of ice. That's the only thing I got.
Yeah.
But the manager of this hotel wrote you a handwritten note. I still have it of like, have a great taping. We're happy you're staying with us. They're on a fruit bowl. So they make you feel like a rock star.
Yeah.
It's just an incredible VIP treatment from like start to finish. Mm-hmm. So then you go there the day before and they do wardrobe. So like, what's your wardrobe going to be? I have to approve it. And then I went black shirt with a white shirt underneath. And you have an option to have your microphone in the microphone stand. So if you wanted a microphone stand, your microphone had to stay in the microphone stand the entire taping. Or if you didn't want it in the microphone stand, there was no microphone stand. So you had to just hold. Yep. So if you watch Comedy Nows, if you see somebody using a microphone stand, the microphone stays in the stand the whole time. And then you had a couple of marks to hit. You couldn't go outside this, this range and this range. And, when you walk out, they're like, okay, we need you to circle like this, and you have to stand forward enough that so your shadow isn't on the back wall. So if you watch Comedy Nows, you'll see everybody stays to the front of the stage because they didn't want your shadow creeping up against it. We're sitting at a table with like the 10 or 12 people we're taping with, and they literally went around the table and they're like, were you going to do a half hour or an hour? Paid exactly the same. Were you going to do a half hour or an hour? And then they would just go half hour, hour, half hour, hour. And I was like, hour. And so you have to give them 48 minutes so that they can trim some of it out. So gave them the 48 minutes. And it's funny because if it comes on the Comedy Network, it happened like last year. I heard a joke that I have no memory of. Like, I was like, oh my goodness, I haven't even thought of that joke in 10 years. Like, and it was a silly joke, but overall I was pretty happy with it. I had a joke that didn't make it on there. I was able to put it on Halifax because it didn't go on that. So when you record like the Winnipeg Comedy Festival or the Halifax Comedy Festival, in the contracts, it's like these jokes can't have appeared on Canadian television before this. So it has to be fresh. But I felt like I was ready for it. And, there's a saying in comedy, you're always 5 years away from where you think you are. Yeah. I'm so grateful I got it. And there's most of the comedians from that, like from my generation who were any good, all got one. If people didn't get one, it was deserved that they didn't get one. Yeah. And I'm not shitting on anybody. I'm like, yeah, you didn't get one just because you weren't good enough. Yeah. And I don't know how else to slice that other than, there's a couple people who go, oh, I should have got one. I'm like, no, they were right. There might have been one or two where I'm like, I don't know. But overall, I was, the experience was rock star-ish. Awesome, hey. Oh yeah, it was tremendous. And anytime you do TV, when they're putting your doing your makeup and there's a wardrobe, it's a pretty cool feeling.
I bet.
I've definitely there's this couple in Winnipeg that came to a show and they were like, we came down to count the number of jokes you repeated from your comedy special. And I was like, that's a weird
reason to come out.
Yeah. And they're like, how many? And they're like, oh, there's only one. So that somebody came out and said, oh, there's only one joke from your comedy special in your act. I'm like, that's a good thing. But, hopefully I've evolved. I feel like I'm finally getting to where I'm really, closer to who I want to be.
And speaking from the gut is kind of how we were terming it last time.
Yeah. And it's, I'm definitely better than I was last year. And I think what I can attribute that to, so the Fire Pit Comedy Tour and doing 205 shows in people's backyards has made me fearless. Yeah. Because we were up against so many distractions, loud mufflers and sirens
going over.
Helicopters and wind chimes and dogs barking and kids crying. What it's done is it's made me, when I walk into a show now, because I did 205 of the hardest shows you could possibly imagine. The crowds were all great. Yeah. Now when I walk into a comedy club show, I'm like, good luck.
It's like taking the ankle weights off.
It really is. It's a perfect analogy. It's now I'm polished. Now I'm battle tested in a way that I was always working hard, but so every Saturday in 2000 from May 2nd, from May 9th to September 27th, we did 5 shows on every single Saturday for the whole summer. And when we were doing it, Norm would go up and do like 10 minutes, and then I would go up and do 50 minutes or close to an hour. To do 5 hours of comedy in a day. And I felt a real obligation, and I've always felt this way, and I think most entertainers would. If it's, when the Stones go up on stage, it goes to a Joe DiMaggio quote where it's like, well, somebody's seeing you for the first time and somebody's seeing you for the last time. So I felt that obligation to like deliver the same level of energy for every single show. And the one Saturday when we did 6 shows, we only did 6 on one Saturday, but we 5 on all the other ones. That 6, I think I maintained my level of enthusiasm and energy for the entire 6 hours.
Wow.
You put in a full day of telling jokes to all these different people, and we just load up, roll out, set up, do the hour of comedy, tear down, roll out, set up, you do the hour of comedy. And it remained fun for me. But I remember when we first had a night off, I had never wanted a night off of comedy in my entire life. I'd never wanted a night. I didn't ever want a night off. And we had a night off. It was a Tuesday. And I was like, first time I'm like, yeah, you know what? I don't want to go do a show tonight.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do a show the next night. But that night I was like, I'm good.
Yeah.
Like for the first time in 17 years, I was like, okay, apparently I'm,
6 hours is my max.
Yeah.
In the day.
Yeah. Where the next, I'm like, we did 87 shows in 55 days or something like that.
That's crazy.
I remember the 56th day when we got a day off, I was like, oh, I'm going to enjoy a day off.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel that obligation of like, I should be working on something. I should be doing something. I'm like, no, I've done 87 hours of comedy and
I bet
in under 2 months. There are international comedians when they do the fringe shows. So they do fringe shows around the world. And when, they do it's basically a one-man stand-up show for an hour. Some of the people do multiple shows. So they'll have 2 different shows and they'll do those shows like 14 times in a week. So there's people that I think that have had the level of work that, they're often not quite as snappy as a normal club set. It's a one-man show. Yeah. So they're themed. Yeah.
I've heard one of my favorite comedians all time, Ari Shaffir. He's just right up there in my books. He's gone and done the Fringe Festival in where is it? In
Edinburgh.
A couple times, and he always talks about that, of just some of those. He's very particular about comedy and just the levels of funny that comes out of some of those theme shows. He's like, they're great for theme shows, but like they think that's comedy. So like he went and done kind of the theme now for a couple of years, but then he went and he said, my theme is an hour of American style stand-up and just like jokes per minute of I want to kill you guys. So he went there with that in mind of kind of showing like the opposite side, and kind of theme that as his theme was like to show the other side of kind of what all these themes are and stuff. Like, but then he ended up getting an hour out of it because he made an hour long, a Jewish show, because he was Orthodox Jewish, grew up, went and studied in Israel for a couple of years and stuff, was full on. And then now he's crazy into drugs and like completely on the other side of it. But he did a whole hour show putting together of everything that had come from all of his upbringing, all the kind of the craziness of the faith and the inconsistencies and where the humor is in from somebody that's that deep inside it. And then COVID came and he stopped and he couldn't tour it. Now he said he's never going to record it. And he's just going to let it die in the ether. And that kills me.
Yeah.
Like to hear, as a fan, to hear the story and what goes into building this hour and to be along the ride and to hear him come on his podcast and, I figured out this other bit. And he was talking about touring it around the US, and sometimes there are people that really got it right. He said like New York shows, there's usually some people that are going to get this, but like taking that to Kentucky and into all these places and to see it and to watch it grow and watch his excitement grow for it. And just to see that he's just going to let it. I don't think he is truly. I think, I don't know, maybe this is just wishful thinking, and I just don't want to think that something that great is gonna go into nothingness like that. But he's just talking about not doing it. It's like, man, that is just so interesting to me that could even be a possibility. And I think maybe it's just more hurt of like, he was so proud of it that he didn't get to do it. Now he's kind of just doesn't want to.
It could also be that it's not representative of you at the time. This sounds
could be. Yeah. Cause once you get it further ahead of your material, like if you get a few years in between you, comics all the time. I've heard you talk about it. Just listen to your old stuff. It's not who you are now. Right?
Yeah.
You can move past it.
Yeah. It's so it's possible but he, if you've got it and Netflix is going to offer him $1 million for it.
Very true. Maybe I'm sure he'll go. And that's the other part he just said is just, I'd have to go, run it for 6 weeks just to get it tightened back up to where I had it. Right. Because now he's been doing new material and that, and now these actual people are allowed to get back out on the road. But that's something else that I'm interested to talk to you about, because I think that was one of the biggest themes that we got to on the last episode, was talking about that shift in comedy that happens. I think we were talking about around the 10-year mark, about you start, the first 10 years is just learning the craft and how it goes and how to edit jokes and how to cut the fat and how to do all that stuff and just almost the mechanics of comedy. And then after that, it's another 10 years of with a full comedy toolbox. Now, how does it come through me? I think you called it, speaking from the gut and making sure your comedy comes from that. And we talked about a few people that really exemplify that, and kind of how that's the goal of all these comedians. And you really spoke eloquently, and just re-listened to that episode. It really hit me deeply because of how much, I don't know, I could tell how much it means to you and stuff. Curious, with about a year's difference between the time we talked, how much further have you got specifically on that, in that effort of trying to find your own voice and speak from your gut, making sure that your comedy, and I think one of the big themes you're talking about was kind of the corporate greed. And I was just thinking of any couple of years that could really highlight the high points of what corporate greed has got us to and the suffering that could bring. I was just thinking it's just a smorgasbord of if you can get to that point, it's just a smorgasbord of topics for you to dive into, kind of is what I was thinking.
Yeah, I think I think I was at a point where I was disappointed. Mm-hmm. So I think I was like, I feel like I should be taking bigger swings than I currently am, because high risk, high reward, like right. I think we are happily better now.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, you watch somebody like Bill Burr, Jim Jeffries, Sarah Silverman, Kathleen Madigan. I'm like, God, they just talk about what's really there. Like, what do they care about? What makes them laugh? What makes them cry? All of that time in all those backyard shows, I feel this, I know I've got material that I can fall back on. And it was Bill Hicks who said, your act is what you fall back on when you have nothing else to say. Mm-hmm. So now, because stuff is tighter, like really, really battle tested in places that you normally wouldn't have had an opportunity. And the reps, to have done so many of them. Now, when I go into something that I care about, man, it's funny because I know I can pull myself, I don't want to say it's a tailspin or a nosedive, because it's not. It's like, I'm going to try some tricks while I'm flying, and I know I can, and I know I'm going to right the ship. I know I'm going to, So, there's been a few times over the past year where I stopped the show and talked about something that meant something to me. Yeah. And I wasn't afraid that I was going to lose them. Right. So the idea of giving them something to take home, which is a comedian had said to me when I was on tour in Iraq, like, always, give them something to take home with them. Right. I think we're like, I would say, having said that on that podcast, then I was like, I knew I wasn't doing what I wanted to do. Right. Now I have moments, and I really do, to say this just sounds so egomaniacal. It sounds so arrogant, but I feel like in the past year, there have been flashes of brilliance. Yeah. And I really, I say that with the smallest grain of, really with the utmost humility. But when those moments have happened over the past year, I'm like, oh.
And that's 17 years of work that worked for those moments.
Yeah. And I'm proud of it. Like all the other stuff, I'm like, I'm a good joke writer. I've always been a good joke writer. Yeah. But now when I have that moment where I'm like, really honest, when I'm being genuine, when I'm being authentic, and I'm being authentic in that moment, I know I've got a joke in the chamber if I need to get to that laugh if I need to. But now I can talk about, I started telling this story. I'll just tell the story. So I had a moment where I'm like, oh my God, I haven't thought about that in years. So this is like, I don't know what the statute of limitations is, but I'm going to tell this. So I remembered this story. So when I was 16 years old, I got a job at Fast Gas in Devon, Alberta.
Yeah.
So near Edmonton, I'm working at a Fast Gas. I'm there for about 2.5 months, like 3 months. They're gas jockey, Fast Gas, pumping gas, washing windows. The owner of the Fast Gas, the franchise owner, leaves one night, midnight move, packed up his stuff, left, called Fast Gas and said, I'm done.
See you later.
So now they have this gas station, a bunch of employees quit with him. To this day, I have no idea. Like, I was 16. I'm like, I don't know why he left.
Yeah.
But he just left. I think his name might have been Mike. Anyway, so he leaves. So there's this gas station with no one to run it. And so Fast Gas, there was no owner. So Fast Gas was like, hey, would you want to like manage this gas station?
At 16.
And I've been working there for 2.5 months. I'm like, yeah, sure.
Might as well.
Intelligent. Yeah. So I was still going to high school. I'm managing this Fast Gas. I robbed it blind.
That's hilarious.
Like, I mean, all the subs that were in the I'd order the stuff. I would just order extra and just give them to my friends when they came in. And like, they had these things called it was like a fast liter log. So you'd get every time you go in, they'd be like, this is how many liters, and the person would have to initial it and you'd stamp it. I would just sit there and stamp these liter logs all day and then fill them all out with like fake note and just give them to my friends so they would just go cash them in somewhere. So I did this. I'm like, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I mean, I'm like, I like to think I'm a more ethical person now, but I was 16 and there was no one cared.
Yeah.
Because there was no one who owned it. And so it was like a victimless. Yeah. Like, it wasn't like, I mean, like, I guess I was taking from Fast Gas. So Fast Gas, I apologize, but like, they didn't care.
They've taken from us.
Yeah. So
That's hilarious.
So a guy comes in, 16. He had worked there before. And he's like, hey, I'm moving to Calgary. I have this car. It's my old car. It's in great shape, runs great. It's 1979 Chevette, 4-door, brown. It was in really good shape. He goes, you want to buy it? And I'm like, no, not really. And I didn't have a car. And he's like, give me $300. It's yours. Is it worth more than that? And I'm like, no. I go, I'll tell you what. I'll give you $100 cash and anything you can carry out of the store in one load.
Yeah. Oh,
if it hits the floor, you don't get to keep it.
Yeah, it's got to stay.
So I watch this guy like he's on a shopping spree.
Yeah.
And I watch him like oil and windshield washer fluid and pop and chips. And I watch him like armload of stuff carried. I got a bill of sale. I gave him $100 and anything he could carry out of the store. And then I didn't, you know how when you go into a hotel, there's like pamphlets, like tourism pamphlets, like, hey, go whitewater rafting or go ziplining or whatever. So the maps were on a rack that I thought was just, do you need a map? You just take a map like you would at like it's just free. So people would be like, how much for the maps? And I'm like, they're free. People would just take a map. Yeah. So the map guy comes in 6 months later and he's like, you sold all the maps. And I looked at him and went, yeah, sold.
Whoops. Talk to the owner. Talk to the owner. Yeah.
I gave him the money. I just opened the till and just paid him for more maps. I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I've been like trying to make this story a little snappier, but I have this moment of like, oh, this was like a real moment.
Yeah.
From when I was 16 years old, like 25 years ago, I was like, oh, I hadn't even thought. So now I'm telling this true life story and really trying to make it snappier.
Find the beats in it.
Yeah, exactly. And the timing. Yeah, precisely.
Oh, that's awesome. And that just brings you back to, one of my favorite, not one of the greatest, but one of my favorite storytellers in the game right now is Bert Kreischer. Just what a goofball he is. And I love listening to his. And actually, it's funny what you're describing of kind of this, how sharp you've got your material now, and that opening the door to taking some more risks and kind of going on more things, knowing you can always fall back. You can always hit him with the flamethrower you got in your back pocket kind of thing. And I always love the way Bert Kreischer would talk about that. He would say, he looks at it as if I've got my boat. My material is my boat and I'm going out, but I want to go for a swim, and I'm going to test how far can I swim away from my boat, and I know I can get back to it if I need to, but I'm going to always be trying to swim away from the boat, and I know it's there, and I know it's secure. except for right after a special. And I think that's where this always comes up, is these guys, once you get into that, I don't know what method that is, but releasing stuff on some sort of cycle, they talk about that fear of you pretty much burned your boat. You're going out there and you might have some older stuff, or you have, your old tricks, or maybe something that's never been recorded, but you're forced to build. And I feel like that's kind of part of that thing we talked about last podcast, the 10 years, and then you're kind of finding your voice in that. I think also what happens there is, as you're finding your voice and the jokes you're writing are starting to come from your voice, the quicker you're turning over that material and you're forcing yourself back into that mode of scared and writing from that true gut place, because that's all you got at that point. I think that also just ramps up that finding your voice period. I would imagine it would have to, right? Because every joke you're writing as your career is going, it's going to be becoming more and more your voice, so that, if your first taped hour is an amalgamation of your first 10 years, the best stuff for your first 10 years, right? But some of it's going to be, closer, newer stuff that's maybe more in your voice. Some of it's kind of older, maybe more jokey jokes like we talked about. And then you throw that all away. And now at the 10-year mark, everything that's written for that next hour is going to be somewhat in your voice, right? And then at the 15-year mark, it's going to be more and more. And I think the faster you turn over your material, I'm curious if that sounds from an actual comedian, if that sounds realistic at all, because that's just me picking it up. And then second to that, if one of your biggest goals is to start speaking more from your gut, do you ever look at it in terms of material turnover as part of that goal?
No. I allow that to happen generically.
Yeah. And I think you should. I think that would put you, just like chasing money. I think if you were chasing that's chasing the wrong things in it, but it does kind of come in.
I think it's good to challenge yourself.
Yeah.
Like those guys who were like, I think it was Chris Rock. He's like, nah, he goes, I don't do one a year. He's like, one every 2 years is fine. Now, to put yourself on a timeline, if you're getting $20 million from Netflix, it'd be nice to see that data on your calendar where you're like, okay, I got to have that ready for that. So there's a little more pressure, but there's also some joy in that. So if you said to me like, okay, a year from now, I want to hear a brand new hour. Okay. And I'm going to give you $100,000.
Right.
And it has to be good. And then I'm like, okay, that idea of, okay, a year from now, I've got, like in Canada, if you get Winnipeg or Halifax, so you do 12 minutes, you do a 12-minute set or a 7-minute set and a 5-minute set in Halifax. And then in Winnipeg, like you do like a couple 10-minute sets or whatever. So in that, you want to be, as I write a new joke that's like TV clean, and I don't do it deliberately. I just write stuff that I think is funny. So there's this new joke that I have that I really, enjoy. I'm like, yeah, this is pretty good. But I'm like, okay, I want to have that 15 minutes for television. Because when they come around for the auditions, you're like, here's 15 new minutes that I think is ready for TV.
Right. And
that 15 minutes a year, it's almost generic. Yeah. Like it almost, like 15 minutes should shake out.
Yeah.
Regardless. So it was funny. I was working, a couple of years ago, I was working with a comedian, and I had used a closing joke for 4 or 5 years, like what would have been his whole career. Yeah. Well, I don't tell that joke anymore. So when I closed, I'm like, oh, thank you, good night. And he was like, he was waiting for me to do my closer from when he had opened for me previously. And he's like, oh, I thought you were going to do that joke. I'm running up to the stage. I'm like, oh yeah, I don't tell that joke anymore. So I think that, the idea of being one of those guys who's like famous enough where they're doing theaters or making $15,000 in a club, they're like, oh yeah, now I can. It's like you being able to focus more on your podcast. In comedy, I guess I allow it to happen generically because I don't have the luxury of going to the Comedy Store. Well, I guess I kind of do, but like, and getting that.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Like,
sure.
I have an obligation to deliver the best show possible. And am I going to sprinkle new jokes throughout? There was in the Wolseley, Saskatchewan this past Saturday. They're famous for a swinging bridge. They have a swinging bridge in their town. And I said,
swinging bridge.
I go, is it a married bridge that sees other bridges?
I like that one.
And it was like the audience, they come up after and they're like, I never would have made that connection. Yeah. And I'm like,
that's what I do.
Yeah. Jokes there.
I'm here till Monday.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. And I like the creative process and it brings me a lot of joy. Like when I'm remembering that story about Fast Gas, I'm like, oh man, I haven't thought about that in so long. It's a pretty funny story. And it's true. Like every word of it's true.
And and every time you tell it, it's just going to get better and better too, which is, I hope so. That's what
Yeah.
You know, like that's kind of the process. And it's, I just love that of just, again, I mean, I kind of, in terms of stories, I always kind of see it from Bert's perspective. When I don't listen to his podcast as much anymore, but I used to be diehard. I never missed it, right? And you could see, like, after he'd release an hour and he'd be in that kind of middle ground where he's finding it, same thing. He'd remember an old story and he would get so excited, and you just kind of tell like the very base of it on the podcast of what it is. But, and then just saying 2 years later at that point, you get to see the special and you get to think of, I got to watch him the day after, the first time he ever told it on stage, and the excitement that was there, and then to watch it grow. What's even better than this was, like, with Joe Rogan, was to hear the bits come to life on the podcast, get to see him come live in Edmonton, see them in their middle form, and then to get to see the Netflix special that's tightened up, and you get to see what all those jokes turned into. So you almost get the spark, the molding, the pottery on the wheel, and then you get to see the finished product. And that is so cool as a comedy. I feel like that'd be way less cool to someone that maybe wasn't as a fan of comedy as I was. But to me, just to see the whole process like that is so cool. And now to see that comedy, I think last time we talked about, kind of the traditional look of, in Hollywood, everything, goes down to, mimes and comedians. And I think that has changed so recently. And it's so much fun to watch. Of now there's these fans of comedy that comedians will talk about. These guys fly from Australia to watch me build an hour. And they come at multiple times to see it at different points because they love the process so much that they will fly around the world to get to watch something be built. Like, that to me just signals a whole new epoch or whatever of comedy.
I don't, because that's interesting. Is comedy gaining more respect in the world of the arts? That's a good question. It's possible. I think people are certainly more aware of the process.
And maybe awareness and respect are two things that I'm conflating that maybe are a little bit more different than I'm seeing from the outside.
It's possible. You're right. I like, when I think about it. So you watch a great actor, I don't know, John Malkovich or something, and he goes on Broadway, wins a Tony Award, or, you watch somebody who's a great singer. Adele releases a new album, or you see Ed Sheeran do something new. So you see these people that are revered, respected. If you were to walk up to 100 people on the street, like 100 people, and be like, do you know the name Bert Kreischer?
Right. Yeah.
Of that 100, how many do you think would say yes?
Here's the thing. I agree with kind of where you're going with that, but I think what I'm saying is, I'd say of those 100, I'm going to guess 2.
Sure.
But I say you go 10 years back, you go to 2011 instead of 2021. Yes, that same question. Maybe pick a different comedian that's maybe at the Bert Kreischer level at that time. Yep. And I think you'd be lucky to get one. Yep. And I think that's the big thing of, it's not the NFL, but it's not, NLL or lacrosse anymore, right? Like it's almost in that stage where it's on the come up. And I think so much of this is because of podcasts too. But I think at its height of, when they talk about the golden age of comedy back with, Rock and all them at that point, and then it kind of went down into a darker time in that. But even at the peak, there was only 4 or 5 guys that were selling out big theaters and stuff. Whereas now you've got Rogan, you've got Burr, you've got Chappelle, you've got Kevin Hart. I could probably sit here and name 15, 20 different people that are playing theater, and then you knock that down, or playing arenas. Then the people that are playing theaters now, it's just in terms of effect. And I hate looking at it through this lens, because we just spent the whole podcast talking about not, but just looking at it through the dollar amount of because that's how so much of the world views it. I think when people saw that Spotify deal that Rogan got to, that was a crazy thing for podcasts. People, holy shit, you can make $100 million plus doing this thing that we just kind of heard about the other day. I think that's the same thing with just people walk around and they see on Times Square, there's always a comedian for either a special or a big show that's coming out. There's always a comedian on there, where I think in the past that'd be very rare, right? Yeah. It'd be one of those rocks. And I think it's just almost, I think comedy was such a special thing, and I think it is such a special thing, but I think it always kind of lived in the underground. For it to exist, it had to, almost for it to be what it was. But now it's starting to be lifted in and brought more into the daylight, and more of your average person, right? Like the fact that my friends who aren't that into comedy can name 20 comedians now, it's that tells me something. I have a feeling that maybe it's easier to see from the outside. Maybe when you're within it, you're so close to the trees, it's hard to see it. But I feel like from the outside, I feel like just for a while there, it felt like I couldn't even talk about some of the more esoteric parts of comedy, but now you can, and people kind of pick up on it and they understand what it is. And I feel like that's, just as a fan, that's awesome. It's like, it's like if you're a fan, like an MMA fan. For a while there, it was really tough to talk about anyone about UFC. Everyone kind of, that's that cage fighting shit, right? But then a couple of years changed, and more people. Oh yeah, I watch that. My son likes it. Or a couple of years later, oh yeah, I watch that. Oh, Conor McGregor, I know the Conor. And there's all these little pieces that come together. But when you look at it, if you just take a step back, you see the effect that it's having, and you can just see it growing like spider webs. And it's just kind of just getting into all these different places that you never would have thought. And I feel like that's the same thing for comedy.
Yep, I think I would agree with that. Then certainly to pull back the curtain a bit and to let people in on a bit of the trade secrets. So when people, oh really, okay, that's pretty cool. And then perhaps I wonder if podcasts, or was it just Netflix? So when you talk about the draw of things, I would love to know. I mean, I know a lot of people that love podcasts, like the majority of my friends listen to a couple, and they eat at Freshie in Grand Prairie. So they like everybody know, like the people that know, but I wonder if the fanatical fans, somebody like you who's just loves those podcasts, likes the Kreischer's, knows a lot of the people that are in now. But then the average person, I wonder if they're more familiar with, like, if they go to see somebody, like, oh, I'm going to go see Amy Schumer in a stadium,
right,
because of her Netflix specials, like,
right,
and then from her comedy specials, she would have got some movies, and that's what, like, it was like when Dane Cook was playing big stadiums. It was like he then became, it's like, it's almost the Steve Martin arc, where it's like become really good, get a big cult following, sell out stadiums, become an actor. So like Eddie Murphy followed that arc. And there's some, like somebody like Kevin Hart who has, a foot on both sides, like he's straddling act, but there's not a lot of those. Somebody like Eddie Murphy who, like, Steve Martin, who quit stand up to make movies.
And that was kind of the dynamic for a lot of years. It was kind of everyone, when you hear these guys talk about it back in the 90s, it was sitcoms, right? Everyone was after the sitcom. Who's going to get the next one, right? And they were handing out deals like crazy. So it was kind of creating that
assembly
idea.
line out of the Ray Romanos and
right, exactly,
Foxworthy and everybody, who like became actors out of that. But now, so it's I think it is possible that I mean, saying bring it into the daylight a little more is certainly is taking place.
And I think Netflix has a huge piece of that. I think I missed that in my first go through, but I think you're very right. Is that really brings people in? And I think also too is this is very unfortunate, I think, but also in a way it's fortunate of what Netflix is not the bastion of comedy, right? Like they are doing amazing things for comedy, for sure. Don't get me wrong, but it's not like they are a comedy platform that really cares about the art per se, right? What they're more about is what is going to get the most people to click on this thumbnail, right? So they very much want, a very broad range. They want, 2 white guys, 2 guys that fill this, 3 women, this, right? Which is tough if you love the art form, because to me, as someone that really loves art form, you just want the best comedian, the funniest people to get that shine, because that's what you want the world to be. So then it's kind of a downside. But I think what's a positive side is there's people who I would never peg for comedy fans that are so anti-comedy, but they saw Michelle Wolf do that
roast,
that roast, and now they they love Michelle Wolf, and that is entering them into this comedy world, right? And I've heard Michelle Wolf talk about this too, is she didn't want to, like, what everyone's attributing to her, she doesn't want to be, she just wants to be a funny comic, right? She didn't want to change the world. She doesn't want to do all this stuff, and now it's attributed to her. But what I see that as is that Michelle Wolf with that show brought in this whole different
correspondence dinner.
Yeah, the correspondence dinner. It brought in this whole different area of people that are coming into kind of the comedy world. And I think that's the same thing with the Netflix, right? Like, say maybe it's not the funniest comedian, but they've ticked one box that brings in another 1,000 people into that comedy umbrella. And maybe they never go any further than that one comic. That's their comic, and that's, to them, that's what comedy is, right? Because I see that. But maybe 10%, 20% of those now branch out and get into more. I think Netflix does have a huge, huge play on that. And I think some of the negatives of their practices of who they give it to or not, it's easy to look at the negative side of it too. But I think on the positive side, that does bring a lot. That expands the envelope of who takes in comedy a lot.
Yeah. I watched, and this is So I don't know if I had heard of Michelle Wolf before the correspondence.
Oh, yeah.
New York comic.
Yeah.
I was in New York and I went to a Comedy Central taping, and there was 10 comedians on the show. The first comedian went up and crushed so hard, and I was like, whoever has to follow that is in some big trouble.
Yeah.
And the next comedian went up and crushed harder, and then I think Michelle Wolf was like fourth or fifth, and the guy before her had crushed so hard, and I was like, I
feel bad for whoever's stepping
right?
into this. Yeah.
Michelle Wolf went up and crushed even harder. And I was like, this was this was the best show I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Like a lineup show. It's the best lineup show I've ever seen in my life. I'm like,
I've seen her live twice and both times were unbelievable.
yeah,
Unbelievable. She's so funny.
she's phenomenal.
And that's what's so funny to me is everyone sees this correspondence and they go, this girl's so funny. It's like, that's like if you took the totality of the things that Michelle Wolf has made me laugh, that's like 7 or 8 on the list. Like you haven't even seen her A shit, right? Like that is her. She's so funny that through that lens of what is expected from a correspondence dinner, she knocked it out of the park for sure. But that's not her best stuff. Like go check out her comedy. Go see her in New York. Go to the Village Underground and go watch a set that she does. Like that is what real funny is. And that's awesome. But does it matter? Whatever gets them in the door, if it's a correspondence dinner or if it's a night out at Golf and Comedy Club, it doesn't matter. Whatever gets the people in the door gets the people in the door. Right.
Yeah.
And that's the other piece of it too, is what I'm thinking. I think with the barriers to comedy, I think for a long time, if you wanted to go see comedy, you kind of had to go see, there's, 5 people a year would get specials back in the day. And other than that, you had to go to this, maybe dark, dingy room, and maybe it just wasn't for people, or maybe it was for people, but they didn't want it to seem like it was for them. Right. But now comedy, the barriers to comedy, to taking it in as a fan is so low. You go on YouTube, you can watch hours and hours of hilarious comedy, right? Sam Morril put a special up. Joe List put an amazing special up. Like I could name 10 different guys that have done it, right? Andrew Schultz was kind of the one that was trying to push all those New York guys to do it. The barriers to entry are so little that like, if you are a comedy fan, this is a great time. You are very lucky to be one because there's nothing holding you back, right? And if you still want to go see those shows, you're going to have another 30-40% increase on that, because no matter how funny Bill Burr's specials are on Netflix, when I went and saw him in Phoenix and the lineup was wrapped around this theater and we get in there and he's the setup of the theater was kind of funny, the way he had to walk, and he was just talking, like did his act, but throughout the act was just talking shit about this theater and had the theater howling. Like I was bent over, like, and it's the same material that I've seen on Netflix and I've laughed at, right? This was obviously the first time seeing it, but like I was physically like couldn't unfold myself from my chest, from my knees, because I was laughing so hard that my stomach hurt. Like you don't get that on TV, right? And I'm not explaining this very well. I just think it's amazing that there's so many different levels. Like if all you want to do is just watch some comedy on TV and laugh a little bit, you can have that. But if you want to go for the real thing, there's so many people and they're playing bigger audiences and it's easier to get tickets because they're playing bigger shows. And I just think this is the best time to be alive as a comedy fan. And I think I can easily say that. Yeah. Right? Like there's nothing else holding back. And I think that's what's interesting too, is I kind of wanted to ask this about earlier when we were talking about the turnover rate and recording something. I think it's different because you were talking about kind of, well, if you have Netflix with a cash offer, that changes that dynamic a little bit. But what I'm most excited for is the guys that aren't even in the ballpark of even looking to Netflix yet. They're those 8-year comics, those 10-year comics that they might have to grind another 6-7 years to get one of those shots. But if they can understand, if this holds true of that, there's that much benefit to turning over your material like that, of now, even though you're going to make way less money just throwing it on YouTube like you see these guys do, but if the benefits of, say you get, you could wait 5 years to get a $50,000 deal from Netflix, or you could get, $500,000 of, like moving forward in your career by just throwing it out there and retrying again. That's what I'm excited for. And I think you're in kind of a different spot because you've already been on TV. That would be a weird step back for you to take because you just kind of got caught up. You were already established when these kind of new paths popped up. So it kind of puts you in a weird position. But what I'm excited for is these younger guys coming up. If that starts to be part of the zeitgeist of this turning over material and trying to find your voice like that, the opportunities for them to just throw it out there and try and make it on their own.
It's accessible.
It's accessible. And that really gets me excited. It's just like in MMA when you started to see, if you're an MMA fan in the early 2000s, you're kind of seeing all these, it's a karate guy or a jiu-jitsu guy, but me as a fan now, you're watching all these 22-year-old kids, 24-year-old kids that have watched UFC 1 through 267. They have trained since they've been 4 years old, not just in jiu-jitsu, but kickboxing, jiu-jitsu, boxing. They've gone and done some karate because the game has changed. I think that's the same thing for comedy. I think for so long, it was so fringe, and not only fringe, but also very one track. If you can navigate all the bullshit that will get you into the comedy world, there was only a few, right? If there was HBO and who's the two special? You get an HBO special or
the Comedy Central presents.
Yeah. Those are kind of the two ones, and only a couple people got them a year. And that was such a lined up path, right? Like you really had to grind. And that's why you saw these 20-year comics that were funnier than so many of the people out there in the world, right? Like the top percentage of a percentage never get a special because they didn't tick the right box or something. But that, I think we're in a weird transitionary phase right now, but I think in the next 5-10 years, that kind of goes away because there's so many paths open. I think it's really going to change that power that those certain companies had over all these comedians. I think it really kicks the door open. And unfortunately, there's going to be people that are kind of in a weird spot where they're in the middle, but I think it really opens the door for these up and comers that are coming up. A guy that's been in comedy 2-3 years right now. Yeah. I think the world is their oyster for those guys.
Yeah, I think, but also now you're circling all the way back around to knowing how to do a little video editing because you don't have the finances to get somebody to do that for you. Mm-hmm. So you're going to learn how to do these other things, because it'll be required. So the people that'll rise to the top of that will be the people who have that skill and can apply that. So like in comedy, it really is, if you're a good business person, if you're a good joke writer, if you're a good joke teller, you like all of these things, it's three-legged stool that in order for it to stand, without one of them, it kind of falls over because there are so many funny people that are bad business people. There's so many good business people that aren't good comedians. It's like to have all three, there's only a handful of them in Canada who are like good and they excel. Like they're, and one of the things we were going to hit on it, and just because it's as we come up on Christmas party season, I wanted to say like it's one of the things that are going to help entertainers, comedians, hypnotists, improv people get to the point where they can put that stuff on Netflix, not only to polish it. One of the things is they supplement their income with corporate comedy shows. Right. So corporate comedy shows, wherever you're listening to this, if you book an entertainer for your company function, could be a barbecue, like Christmas party, whatever it is.
Spring breakup party.
Whatever. Yeah. So if you're having a function and you hire a musician, dueling pianos, improv, stand-up comedian, funny money casino, murder mystery, like anything like that. Yeah. What you're doing is you are helping those comedians live their dream, or those entertainers. You're helping supplement their income so that they can continue to pursue this passion. One of the things that allowed me to go to Australia and Asia and lose money for the first couple of years was the fact that I got to, I do pretty well during corporate season. I do a lot of company Christmas parties. So one of the things I wanted to talk about as we go into corporate season is how to make it work. Yeah. Now, if you have a company big enough to have an entertainer, I would say, probably more than 50, over 100, it's pretty easy to the budget for an entertainer is often calculated as such. If they're super famous, they're going to be really expensive. If you want Brent Butt, he's going to be, $25,000, $50,000, whatever, from Corner Gas or whoever. But your average entertainer, what they often do is it's in the $15 to $25 per head. So like the same way you pay for a plate at, a buffet, it's per person. So say, call it $20. So that's what you'd pay in a comedy club. So you can expect, if you've got 150 people, around $3,000. Again, if you have a higher profile person, it's going to be a little more. In order to make the entertainer succeed, ask them to direct you. Yeah. A lot of times people go, this is the way I want to do it. This is the way it has to be done. This is the way I want to do it this way. I'm like, well, you can do it that way, but it's not going to work as well. And I'm not saying this. One of the things that I say when somebody's booked me for a Christmas party is I go, dinner, 10-minute break, tell them 10 minutes. They always take 15. Tell them 10-minute break. Give a professional introduction to your comedian, hypnotist, a musician, whatever.
Entertainer of any sort. Yeah.
So right after dinner, everybody is digesting. They want to relax. Like if you think about a Thanksgiving dinner, you just want to sit in front of the TV
Undo your pants,
like just
watch some
relax. Yeah,
football.
yeah. So you've had your, have a drink in your hand, and so you tell them, go get a fresh drink, go have a smoke, go use the washroom. We're going to start in 10 minutes. Then in 15 minutes, you go, ladies and gentlemen, blah, blah, blah. So a lot of times at Christmas parties, I've seen people want to do door prizes. Well, we'll do the door prize, and we'll bring up. I go, yeah, but people feel obligated to go to their company Christmas party. If you do the door prizes before the entertainer, it drags, and they're going to be in those chairs for a long time. So think about this. They sat down when they got there, mingled a bit, did whatever. They were in those chairs for about an hour and a half. If you do the entertainer right then, they've been in those chairs for over 2 hours by the time you get through dinner and the entertainment. They've been there for 2 hours. If you drag that out, they start to get antsy. They start to get fidgety because they want to get up and move a bit. Mm-hmm. So if you go dinner, break, entertainer, you're setting them up to succeed.
Mm-hmm. Especially with comedy.
Right. You do the door prizes. Once the door prizes are over, a lot of people will leave. Yeah, they're like, I'm going to go. I've won the big screen TV. Now I'm going to call it a night. Mm-hmm. Go home and watch Netflix. Yeah. So if you put the entertainer up right after dinner, it's going to be best for you. Now, if possible, don't put a huge dance floor between the entertainer and the crowd. A lot of times the stage is just where the band would be in front of a dance floor, and that's how it would be set up if you were a musician, which is if you have music, that's great. But if you're having improv, a hypnotist, a comedian, they call it the comedy moat. So when you have this comedy moat, it creates a real disconnect because you're so far away from facial expressions and the subtleties that are stand-up comedy. You kind of want it to be proximity. You want it to be close. You want it to be like right in your face.
You want to feel their energy.
Right. And really see to be able to see them really helps the performance. So if you do it that way, do your door prizes after. Do your speeches. If you're just going to do one, just do one. If there are multiple speeches and long-term service awards and other awards, do that all after the comedian. Mm-hmm. Because if you do it that way, people have to sit through that and they can tune out. But if you do all of that stuff and then I remember I did a show for Save on Foods, and they were going to, it was like all awards for all of Alberta. So they had all these store owners from all over Alberta, and they're like, we're going to do the awards and we're going to bring up the comedian. I go, everyone's going to leave. Yeah. You have these people from High Prairie and Red Deer, and I'm like, you give them their award and then you tell them they have to stick around to watch an hour of comedy. Well, they're all going to go to the bar in Edmonton, like they're they're going to go out to enjoy some of the nightlife in another city. They're on vacation. So by the time they finish the awards, they're like, okay, we're going to take a break and then bring your comedian. I'm like, oh, this is over. Yeah. And everybody left but 8 people. Now my paycheck remains the same, but I want those people to get value. Yeah. So push all of your awards and speeches to after. I mean, you can do if the president or owner wants to get up and say something, obviously
keep it quick.
Go, but, and then get a nice intro. The setup of the room, you can Google good setups for corporate Christmas parties, and you'll see different ways to set up the table. A couple of those ways that I've done it is if there's a dance floor and if there's a stage in the hotel or whatever, I ask them if they can set it up on the side of the room. So the stage is set up on the side of the room. They're often round tables, so people are going to have to shift their chairs anyway. But if it's on the side of the room, then I'm not the comedy moat. The dance floor isn't in my way. I'm right up against them. And it's, what you're going to do is if you book an entertainer for your Christmas party this year, you're going to help that person get to Los Angeles or New York or Melbourne, Australia, or you produce their album, hire an editor so they could put stuff on YouTube, whatever it is. And if you work for a big corporation, think about sponsoring a podcast. And that's not even just a cheap plug. Go I could throw a couple $100 at that and you get your name mentioned a couple of times. Yeah. What we don't realize is that couple of $100 a month in advertising, and podcasts are, as big or bigger than radio. And you're going to help that person live a dream. If there's a podcast you like, send a little bit of money to them. It really does make all of the difference in the world. And it makes the people chasing those dreams, it makes it a little less scary to know that people are helping you out. It's book a comedian or entertainer for your dueling pianos is great. A little bit, it can be, it's pricey, but worth it. If it's a big company.
If it's big enough. If just specific to comedy because that's your expertise, and if I have any expertise, it's the closest I'm going to get to in the entertainment industry. What's the best way to reach out? Is it just within the company? If you know somebody, is it like, because like you said, there's different levels of comedian, right? Brent Butt that you're probably gonna have to go through figure out who his management is and go through that. But there's so many guys that are really funny but aren't on that page. Is social media going through that? Is that the best way? Like, what would you say the best way if you're a company that has, let's say 100 employees and you think, oh, it'd be awesome to have a comedian for my Christmas party? What would be the best place for them to start?
And I say this because of how long I've been around Canadian entertainment. So it's going to sound, so all of the agencies in Canada, or the majority of them, are pretty good. So you Google comedy agency, corporate comedy, you're going to find these agencies that book entertainers. And it's kind of fun because I work for like pretty much all of them. Yeah. If somebody in like Estevan, Saskatchewan wants a comedian, they'll Google an agency and they'll like call the agency and they'll go, hey, I want a comedian for my company Christmas party. And they usually send them 3 options. Yeah. And then they'll call a different agency, and that other agency will reach out to me for the same date in the same town. So I know that company is like seeing their price comparing and checking around. But it's pretty much you're going to get very similar pricing in it. There's some low end stuff, but Ed Smeal, who was Russell Peters' manager for 15 years, his brother's taken over since. But Ed Smeal has one of his lines in his company is Giggles Comedy Agency is, good talent isn't cheap and cheap talent isn't good. So you can get somebody for $500, but what's going to happen is you're going to get anybody who's willing to work for that amount is usually like inexperienced or a club comic, and they're probably going to offend, which can really submarine it for everybody else. So what you can do, so if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I want to think about doing, booking a comedian for my Christmas party, you can reach out to me. I don't book comedians. I'm not an agent. I'm not a manager. I'm just a stand-up comedian. What in your town, I'll know the comedian in Winnipeg. There's like 3 pretty good corporate comedians in Winnipeg. I know the guy in Saskatoon. I know the guy in Regina. I know the people in Vancouver. I know the people in Kelowna. Like, I know enough good quality comedians across Canada and North America for that matter. Well, actually, I could probably hook you up in Australia, England, Australia, Thailand. I've been so blessed and I've been able to tour so much. So if you're thinking about hiring a comedian, and virtual is a new thing, like I've done like 100 virtual shows in the past year and a half. But if you reach out to me and say, hey, I live in, Lloydminster and I want a comedian for my Christmas party, I'm like all my Fridays and Saturdays in November, December, like pretty much booked, but I'll find you somebody who's great. Now I don't take commission on it. What I do is I go like, here's who you want to talk to. And then you book them directly. Now you don't want a reputation of like cutting out agents. Like if an agent heard this, they would be like, oh, you're telling people not to book through the agent. You absolutely can book through the agent. Most agents in Canada take 25% of what you pay them, which is their fee. That's they have to maintain their website. They have to provide a great service, and they take a commission for it. So if you're somewhere and you're thinking about having a musician, a comedian, improv, doing pianos, whatever it is, message me and I will recommend somebody for you. It's possible I can do the gig, but this isn't a pitch just to find me work. I really want the people who are trying to pursue this crazy dream in the business of entertainment. I want them to have that opportunity. And feel like, oh, okay, I never thought about having it right out. And the difference it's going to make if I set up the room more conducive to like it being better for the entertainers, and or just ask them. The entertainers will tell you the best way to set it up. And if you just trust their expertise, it's going to be. And
it's usually just simple little things that make a huge difference, especially with comedy. That was something that, with my business mind, I was always thinking, right, like, man, it'd be cool to open a comedy club one day. So I'm always listening when people talk about those clubs that are just amazing. The one in the Denver Comedy Works always pops up with people, right? Gotham, all those main ones, the Comedy Store, and specifically like the Belly Room, and what makes those things special. It's amazing how, I guess, I don't think it's counterintuitive, but I think when you're outside of it, it seems counterintuitive. Like all these, wait, you want it to be dark? You want it to be kind of cramped? You want low ceilings? Like, that doesn't seem like conducive to a good show, right? But with comedy, it really is.
It really is.
And but that's what I'm saying. If you don't have any of that knowledge, or you're outside of it, you would shoot yourself in the foot trying to do the right thing, what you think you're setting up for a good show. Sometimes with comedy, that's the exact opposite of what you should be doing, right? Same with, thinking, oh, well, we'll put it right at the end, right? Make sure, like, let them be the closer. Well, sometimes that doesn't help, right? And I think you're right on the money there by saying, trust the talent, trust them to have the expertise in their field that they're bringing forward.
And I booked, it's nice when they listen.
Yeah.
Because, and I won't force it. Like if somebody goes, I want you to do 20 minutes and then take a break and then do 20 minutes and take a break and do 20 minutes. I'm like, okay. Like it's a terrible idea.
I don't think that's going to go well.
The momentum, like getting people focused, it's like herding cats. They're all out having a smoke. They're mingling by the bar. To get them all seated and focused again, it's like stop, start. This is a terrible idea, but that's the way they wanted to do it. So I'm like, all right. Yeah. I'm like, and I try to tell them, like, look, you're paying me this much money. Yeah. I want this to be a success for you. Now, this is going to make it less successful. Yeah. I can pull it off, but
there's going to be 15 minutes of comedy in that 60 minutes because the rest of it's just going to be wrangling and getting people back together and getting people's attention. Yeah, I hear exactly what you're saying.
So so if you have the musician, where would you like to set up? Here's the layout of the room. This is, and then like I said, most of like Ed Smeal is fantastic. MCP is another Events Edge out of Regina. There's one in Coquitlam, Wayne Monson of Pacific Entertainment. Like they're all like I work for all of them. Robert Gallant from New Brunswick in Moncton. So all these agencies are fantastic, and they'll take good care of you. They'll send you a good comic because they want your repeat business. They want to be the agency that books you forever. But if you want to just find me at Instagram, Twitter, Extra Lars, or my website's extralars.com. Just go to that and be like, hey, we need an entertainer on this night. Who would you recommend? I'll just go like reach out to this person and this person, and it'll be somebody who's really great for you.
And that's awesome. And that's kind of what, when I asked you how the best way, I didn't want to be presumptive and say to contact you because I know we talked a bit about that and think that is the best way to do it. I'm curious, corporate stuff aside, because I think that's a little bit different skill set that comes at a different time. In this Edmonton comedy scene, you're pretty plugged in, and maybe less so on the open mic side. But I'm just wondering if you see is there some hot young guys and girls coming up right now in the scene that are doing pretty good, making some waves, or is it a bit of a? No. I know that comes in waves, so sometimes there's more or less.
Hey, I think that the arc has been like the same, where there will be like 5 or 6 people every year that are like the top of their class, every year, and. I think a couple of them are moving to Toronto, but there's like the kind of the previous class of the Ryan Short. So like if you look up Ryan Short, he's fantastic. Alex Fortin just moved to Ottawa. And then there's these younger guys. So there's this really funny kid with great perspective, and they started when they were like 18 years old. Yeah. So this kid named Kean Beatty is really, really funny. Talking about like just throwing out some names. Keith Sarnosky is one of the funniest human beings I have ever seen. Yeah. Keith Sarnosky's brain just is designed for comedy. Yeah. I remember seeing him. He went up at an open mic and told jokes, and it was like his first or second time ever and it was just at a music open mic. Mm-hmm. And his voice always existed. He was finished from the beginning. Yeah. He was awesome. God, he was such a good comic. He is such a good comic. Yeah. And it's all these brilliant original thoughts and ideas. Mm-hmm. Like he has this one joke that's just so fantastic. He goes, ISIS is a lot like Saskatchewan Roughriders fans. They don't realize that nobody else takes the shit that seriously.
That's hilarious. That's so good. Oh, man. Oh,
Keith is like, whenever he like you see him on stage and he like takes these. I remember 10 years ago, Michael Vick was going to jail for drowning a dog. Yeah. And we obviously don't condone or anything like that, but it's a joke. So Keith Sarnosky goes, yeah, of course he drowned that dog. That dog lost him $80,000. He goes, if my dog peed on the carpet, my dad would kick it across the cul-de-sac.
Oh, that's funny.
And I'm like, again, it's tongue in cheek, but it's like his brain just is meant for comedy. So, that's awesome. The younger guys are, fantastic. And, but there's so many names across the country that you're like, oh, I never even heard of that person.
I bet. Well, that's something we talked about last time. It was just, that was a fun part of getting into this comedy podcast world, was just hearing these names that would pop up on all these podcasts, right? The big ones, but lots of times I'd hear them on the smaller ones. Oh, have you heard it? I think last time we talked about Theo Vaughn, and Theo Vaughn's doing huge things right now. But at the time, he didn't have any podcasts, didn't have any shows really, but you could hear the people talking about because of how much he was killing the clubs, right? You'd hear about him. Andrew Santino, same thing. You just hear you'd hear the name, right? And they might bring him on as a guest and talk about it and just say, like, this guy's like, remember this name. And it's kind of a cool thing. It makes it more personal, because now when you see Andrew Santino on a TV show or in a movie or doing amazing podcasts, he's got a couple going right now, it's like you feel so much more connected to him, because it's like, I heard this, it wasn't through the corporate machine that pumped this out and I saw it on a commercial in between the Oilers game, right? And it was kind of forced to me. No, I got to hear it with something like, I chose to listen to these podcasts because I love them. And I found this amazing up and coming person. Those are bad examples of up and coming because they put in, like you say, 15 years before they had their overnight success, but it makes it feel like I found them. I found Theo Von, which obviously is crazy. I didn't find Theo Von, but that's the way it feels when I get to watch him and I get to watch his career go and get to watch him hit all these new milestones. It's like you're following along that journey with him. And that's just so exciting. That's why I get excited. I need to get more into my Canadian comedy scene and start learning some of these names, because when you mention all those names, that almost makes me sad that I don't recognize any of them, because I need to do better as, a comedy fan to support my local guys and get them fired up in the same way that I was for all these guys like Theo Von and stuff, because it's the same thing, same journey that they're on. It's just maybe a little bit different part in the journey.
I'm going to send you one of my favorite. She just had her second baby.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give everybody a name. She lives in LA now. She lives in Los Angeles, but I'm going to give you her
her handle?
Yeah, her handle. So it's her name is Aisha Alpha. I'll spell it for you. Aisha, Aisha, and then last name Alpha, Alfa. Aisha Alpha, she's a good friend of mine. Started watching her when she was 19 years old. I've always called her like a comedy little sister.
Yeah.
She is one of the funniest people.
Yeah.
She's getting some heat in Canada as well, but deservedly so.
Yeah.
Like whenever I see her work, we did a comedy festival. So I met her in Winnipeg when she was, first starting out, and she was so funny and so wonderful and smart. And then she got on This Hour Is 22 Minutes and, got Just for Laughs. And then I worked with her at a comedy festival in San Luis Obispo. But Aisha Alpha is so funny. Yeah. And I think that you're going to see her over the next couple of years.
We'll be hearing that name.
Really blow up. She has this one joke. I'm not going to do it justice, but so one of her parents is black. I think her dad's black and her mom's white. And then she goes, the lighting was never good in any of our family photos. It was either too dark or too we couldn't get the lighting right. And it's just so, it's like she just really, and it draws from her own life and her own experiences. And she's so great at conveying the thoughts and ideas. Oh my goodness. One of the best stories of storytellers I've ever seen in my life. Mae Martin, M-A-E, Mae Martin. Mae Martin, I did the Halifax Comedy Festival with her in 2010. And then I was walking downtown Melbourne, and I was she was a half a block in front of me. And I was like, huh. I'm like, Mae Martin? She turns around, and I'm like, hey, we did Halifax together. So she's like, oh, I got, going to my show. I'll come see it. I've seen her show 3 times now. All 3 times. One of the greatest storytellers I've ever seen.
Really?
As good or better than Jim Jeffries, which is
and storytelling is a hard thing to do.
She's so fantastic.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, she's a hell. But she lives in England and is getting a lot of heat in England. She got a TV show.
Nice.
But look up Mae Martin. She is one of the most beautiful human beings. By that, a beautiful human being, inside and out, and is one of the funniest comedians. Yeah. I should be so lucky as to ever be able to tell a story like her.
Wow.
She is so.
Oh, that's awesome.
She's brilliant. Truly brilliant. Yeah, she's amazing. So I have to run, my friend.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think we said this last time that we knew going into it, all the questions I'd have for you, we wouldn't get it done in 1 episode, and now we know we wouldn't get it done in 2. So we'll just have to do a 3rd one. That's all it means. I didn't want to talk some more in New York with you, talk about performing comedy overseas. We didn't get to that. There's a million things, but thanks again for coming by, spending some time with me, letting me ask all my nerdy comedy questions with you. It feels awesome to talk to a real comedian. It makes it feel like that was always such a big part of this podcast. Was I really wanted to highlight comedians and let my passion for the art shine through, and hopefully help that bring other people into that fold and that envelope of comedy watchers that we talked about. The more I can grow that, so it feels awesome to bring you on and have more conversations. I'm sure we'll do it lots in the future, and just wanted to say a huge thank you. It means a lot to me every time.
It's my pleasure, and thank you very much for the beers in the luxury box last night.
Yeah, of course, it was lots of fun. I even kept my Oilers jersey on for we didn't even talk Oilers. Holy man. Oh well, we got a whole thing to do next time. All right, thanks, Lars.
My pleasure.
All right, quick little outro here. I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. My throat, I don't know what's going on. Just recording that intro has totally made it a million times worse. It's only 10 minutes of talking, but who knows? So just a quick, short one. Like I said in the intro, if you can follow all the social medias, pass an episode on to a friend, I really appreciate that. Subscribe, like, leave a review. All those things really help the podcast, and I'm really appreciative of it. So thank you so much for doing that. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.